all this time thinking of me. How come you're not there when you got me? I know that you're busy, so make the time. If you want this with me, do me right. I could be somewhere else, but I'd rather be with you. And that's what I call time well spent. So what do you call it when you're with me? Is it time well spent? So what do you call it when you're with me? Is it time well spent? You took all this time thinking you'd be playing on my mind like you should be. You know when you miss me, I'm hard to find. So when you are with me, love me blind. I could be somewhere else, but I'd rather be with you. And that's what I call time well spent. So what do you call it when you're with me? Is it time well spent? So what do you call it when you're with me? Is it time well spent? So what do you call it when you're with me? Oh, is it time well spent? So what do you call it when you're with me? Is it time well spent?
I still remember how it used to be, holding hands, running wild and free. Crossed our hearts there, we never let go. I still think about our younger days, how we dreamed about a better life, holding you so close to me, in the backseat of your ride. We fell apart, thought we lost everything, just lost in our memories. And I sure hope you do remember me like I remember you.
Hello there. Sorry for the delay. I went out to turn the air conditioner up and get some drink, and I remembered I forgot to feed my cats. And the cats would never have forgiven me for that, so I had to go and feed them. What plans for Strim? Well, we can chat for a bit, and then I'm going to read some more of Lord of the Rings. You gotta feed the kibbums, that's right. I've gotten Empress Teresa through Google Translate through chapter 9, but now I'm not sure if I have the whole book. I think my Kindle edition might have gotten corrupted, and Norman has removed it from being available for Kindle. Hi, Albel. How are you, dear? My friends is here. I should plug my phone in since I'm using it as a remote control. And Norman is Norman. We don't discuss Norman. Norman has issues. Okay. I am okay, Albel. How are you? I am old. I'm old now. It's very sad. But the kitties are fed. I once again remembered I have a wireless keyboard so I can get it just out of my way. Got important stuff to do and keep putting it off. No, you should. You know, the sooner you do it, the sooner it is just over with. I'm old. Soon I'll be walking along with my cane, yelling at kids to get off my dang yard. But yeah, it's been a very quiet day. It was just me and the mama, and I made myself a birthday cake of bread and peanut butter and cream cheese and chocolate sauce and whipped cream, which seemed like a good idea after I'd been drinking. Pretty sure I'm gonna puke it up. But I have more lemonade vodka. So. Your dad and I are birthday twinsies. Birthday twinsies. Carrie and I are almost birthday twinsies. Limo vodka. Yeah, I found a container of Country over Time lemonade that's expired, but I've never let food being expired stop me. And plus, it's powdered lemonade. Like, what could it do? It's not molded. I did check that. So, I poured it in the glass. Some vodka and some water. Had a birthday dinner at a fancy restaurant. That sounds like fun. I am jealous. I hope that your dad had a good birthday, and I hope that you guys had a good dinner. I would ask if you can hear me, but I am assuming that you can and that the volume levels are okay. Should we drink water too? Oh yeah, it's like 90% water. So, I'm not too worried about it. I'm a little quiet. Let me move the microphone a little closer than is. Is that better? Is that better? I'm being a little smartass now. I should go into the ASMR category. All whispering all the time. Except I forget what I'm supposed to be whispering. And then I suddenly just start talking. That would probably piss people off. So, anyway, hopefully soon, because I am off work for the next week. So I'm hoping that I can try out streaming more. Aw, you're sweet, Carrie. and I'm hoping that I can get the rest of Empress Teresa through Google Translate and verify that I do have the whole book. If I don't have it, we'll get what we've got. I don't think having part of it or a whole book really makes much difference at this point. The original book makes no sense, so the Google translated one will not make sense. It's pretty funny though. See, if dessert is underwhelming, to me that just, I don't know. Like, dessert is the last note of the meal, so it is what needs to impress you. So I am sorry that the dessert was underwhelming. I can forgive an okay starter, but not an underwhelming dessert. We must find them and explain this to them. They are not allowed to serve underwhelming desserts. Have you ever considered doing audiobooks? I actually did sign up through Amazon. So far I have not heard anything from anyone, but I did sign up for it, for narrating audiobooks, but I think they want people with experience. My experience is doing the equivalent of shit posting on Twitch. Well, I'm glad that the main was delicious at least. And how do you get experience? I have no idea. Like I said, I've created my profile. I can't remember now what portion of Amazon it even is. Oh yeah, I know I would record it without the I mean, I don't have the waves in the campfire going when I'm not streaming. I know it's hard to believe that this isn't just like my natural background. I actually have a story of my own. It's a very short story, and I have to do some final edits and make sure that I've got everything right, and then I think I'm going to record it myself. Do my own recording of it. And I think I want to take the Empress Teresa one and animate it, like throw some pictures in there, because some of the things are so hilarious, but with visual aids, it's even more hilarious. But yeah, if I have to just narrate my own stories, so be it. Oh, and I have also become a little prepper because people here are like, for some reason they think that society is about to collapse, and so we're going through 2020 all over again with the shelves being empty and things being restricted, and I just don't understand. I mean, I understand to a degree, but then it's like, no. When I record it, I will definitely be posting a link into the Discord, because I'll probably put it up on my YouTube channel. And we will see. Maybe that's how I get experience, so that some other authors will want me to record their books. Though the other thing with the Amazon site is they expect like a lot of work out of you. Hi Skillfully, how are you? I am having a great birthday now. My friends are here. Because I did notice like they expect you to record. They expect the narrator, whoever does the audio on the book, to do all of the editing of the audio. Hello, True King Mom. Oh, thank you. I'm sorry work beckons, but hey, work is work, right? I hope that you're having a great day. Night. It is night for you like it is for me. We are in the same time zone. I have to remind myself of these things. So yeah, Walmart will only sell me 2 tiny hams at a time, and that makes me very sad, because I love the tiny hams. Graveyard hustle never ends. That is true. Hello, Drummond. I'm glad to see you here. It has been a long time since I have streamed. It's been a long time since I've streamed and anyone showed up. Because I stream at bizarre times sometimes. But I'm trying to do better, starting today. Oh, that is a cute little emoji. I love that. Is that a duck with a gift on its head? That is cute. I want that emoji. I'm thinking about, I have so many like plans in my little head now that I've got the next week off and I can do almost whatever I want. I've got a couple of things I have to take care of. Don't have to take care of, want to take care of while I'm off. So I was looking at some other stream overlays to like make my stream look more professional. I decided I'm not professional. I'm not a good streamer. I feel you on that one. I feel you on that one when you want to sleep and your mind is like, no, we are going to think about this now. Look at all these things you need to do. Look at all these things you need to think about. No, we're not going to sleep. A mood. This whole stream is going to be a mood. Especially now that I figured out that I can remove my... I don't know why I keep forgetting that I have a wireless keyboard and I keep doing things around it. And it's like I can just pick up the keyboard and yeet it. Not yeet it too far because I need it for work, but I don't know why I keep forgetting that. So now I am all comfy here because you have to work in 5.5 hours. You go to sleep. You just tell your mind, be quiet. We are not going to think anymore. We are going to sleep. Sleep. You listen to my voice and feel yourself getting sleepy. And the brain stopping and shutting up and letting you sleep. Yeah, I can't eat the keyboard too far because I'll break it. But I don't know why I got a wireless keyboard and then I forget that it's wireless. Oh yeah, because I'm a dumbass. That's why. Uh-oh. I have lost the index card that is my placekeeper for this book. I will have to find something else to use. I've thought about doing I guess I could like do reading ASMR. You go to sleep, friend. Go to sleep and wake up as rested as you can after 5.5 hours of sleep. So you're gonna get some ASMR here as I rummage through papers to get a piece of notebook paper. ASMR of USB cables. There. Okay, we have a piece of paper now. Watch me lose it too. I'll give that one a look, Albo, after the stream, because I know if I click on it now, it's going to open up and now I'm going to have multiple audios. I will be so confused. But I will definitely check that out when I'm done streaming. Alright. Are we ready to continue our reading of The Lord of the Rings? index card is, but I will live. Alright. Chapter 8. Fog on the Barrow Downs. That night they heard no noises, but either in his dreams or out of them, he could not tell which, Frodo heard a sweet singing running in his mind. A song that seemed to come like a pale light behind a gray rain curtain, and growing stronger to turn the veil all to glass and silver, until at last it was rolled back, and a far green country opened before him under a swift sunrise. The vision melted into waking, and there was Tom whistling like a tree full of birds, and the sun was already slanting down the hill and through the open window. Outside everything was green and pale gold. After breakfast, which they again ate alone, they are ready to say farewell, as nearly heavy of heart as was possible on such a morning, cool, bright, and clean under a washed autumn sky of thin blue. The air came fresh from the northwest. Their quiet ponies were almost frisky, sniffing and moving restlessly. Tom came out of the house and waved his hat and danced upon the doorstep, bidding the hobbits to get up and be off and go with good speed. They rode off along a path that wound away from behind the house and went slanting up towards the north end of the hill brow under which it sheltered. They had just dismounted to lead their ponies up the last steep slope when suddenly Frodo stopped. "Goldberry," he cried, "my fair lady, clad all in silver green. We have never said farewell to her, nor seen her since the evening." He was so distressed that he turned back, but at that moment a clear call came rippling down. There on the hill brow she stood beckoning to them. Her hair was flying loose, and as it caught the sun it shone and shimmered. A light like the glint of water on dewy grass flashed from under her feet as she danced. They hastened up the last slope and stood breathless beside her. They bowed, but with a wave of her arm she bade them look round. And they looked out from the hilltop over lands under the morning. It was now as clear and far seen as it had been veiled and misty when they stood upon the knoll in the forest, which could now be seen rising pale and green out of the dark trees in the west. In that direction the land rose in wooded ridges, green, yellow, russet under the sun, beyond which lay hidden the valley of the Brandywine. To the south, over the line of the Withywindle, there was a distant glint like pale glass where the Brandywine River made a great loop in the lowlands and flowed away out of the knowledge of the hobbits. Northward, beyond the dwindling downs, the land ran away in flat and swellings of gray and green and pale earth colors, until it faded into a featureless and shadowy distance. Eastward the Barrow Downs rose, ridge behind ridge into the morning, and vanished out of eyesight into a guess. It was no more than a guess of blue and a remote white glimmer blending with the hem of the sky, but it spoke to them, out of memory and old tales, of the high and distant mountains. They took a deep draught of the air, and felt that a skip and a few stout strides would bear them wherever they wished. It seemed faint-hearted to go jogging aside over the crumpled skirts of the downs toward the road, or jogging aside when they should be leaping, as lusty as Tom, over the stepping stones of the hills straight towards the mountains. Goldberry spoke to them and recalled their eyes and thoughts. "Speed now, fair guests," she said, "and hold to your purpose. North with the wind in the left eye and a blessing on your footsteps. Make haste while the sun shines." And to Frodo she said, Farewell, elf friend. It was a merry meeting. But Frodo found no words to answer. He bowed low and mounted his pony, and followed by his friends, jogged slowly down the gentle slope behind the hill. Tom Bombadil's house and the valley and the forest were lost to view. The air grew warmer between the green walls of hillside, and the scent of turf rose strong and sweet as they breathed. Turning back, when they reached the bottom of the green hollow, they saw Goldberry, now small and slender like a sunlit flower against the sky. She was standing still watching them, and her hands were stretched out towards them. As they looked, she gave a clear call, and lifting up her hand, she turned and vanished behind the hill. Their way wound along the floor of the hollow, and round the green feet of a steep hill, into another deeper and broader valley, and then over the shoulder of further hills, and down their long limbs and up their smooth sides again, up onto new hilltops and down into new valleys. There was no tree nor any visible water. It was a country of grass and short springy turf, silent except for the whisper of the air over the edges of the land, and high lonely cries of strange birds. As they journeyed, the sun mounted and grew hot. Each time they climbed a ridge, the breeze seemed to have grown less. When they caught a glimpse of the country westward, the distant forest seemed to be smoking, as if the fallen rain was steaming up again, from leaf and root and mold. A shadow now lay round the edge of sight, a dark haze above which the upper sky was like a blue cap, hot and heavy. About midday they came to a hill whose top was wide and flattened, like a shallow saucer with a green mounded rim. Inside there was no air stirring, and the sky seemed near their heads. They rode across and looked northwards. Then their hearts rose, for it seemed plain that they had come further already than they had expected. Certainly the distances had now all become hazy and deceptive, but there could be no doubt that the downs were coming to an end. A long valley lay below them, winding away northwards until it came to an opening between two steep shoulders. Beyond, there seemed to be no more hills. Due north, they faintly glimpsed a long, dark line. "That is a line of trees," said Mary, "and that must mark the road. All along it, for many leagues east of the bridge, there are trees growing. Some say they were planted in the old days." "Splendid," said Frodo. "If we make a good going this afternoon, as we have done this morning, we shall have left the downs before the sun sets and be jogging on in search of a camping place." But even as he spoke, he turned his glance eastward and saw that on the side of the hills were higher and looked down upon them. And all those hills were crowned with green mounds, and on some were standing stones, pointing upward like jagged teeth out of green gums. That view was somehow disquieting, so they turned from the sight and went down into the hollow circle. In the midst of it there stood a single stone, standing tall under the sun above, and at this hour casting no shadow. It was shapeless and yet significant, like a landmark or a guarding finger, or more like a warning. But they were now hungry, and the sun was still at the fearless noon, so they set their backs against the east side of the stone. It was cool, as if the sun had had no power to warm it, but at that time this seemed pleasant. There they took food and drink, and made as good a noon meal under the open sky as anyone could wish, for the food came from down under hill. Tom had provided them with plenty for the comfort of the day. Their ponies, unburdened, strayed upon the grass. Yes, ASMR can be... Uh-oh. No. Yikes, sorry about that. I had the mouse a little too close and didn't realize that when I bumped it with my glass, it would decide to launch something. Yeah, ASMR can be very popular. That's why a lot of people use that category on Twitch. I've got to figure out a better way to hold this book. Alright, back to our... Whoa. Perhaps I should... Wait, are you guys seeing... Are you guys seeing the fire? Okay, now I see it. For a second I had a blank screen. Scared myself. Well, now that that's over and we've established that I definitely should not be drinking anymore, let us continue. Riding over the hills and eating their fill, the warm sun and the scent of turf, lying a little too long, stretching out their legs and looking at the sky above their noses. These things are, perhaps, enough to explain what happened. However that may be, they woke suddenly and uncomfortably from a sleep they had never meant to take. The standing stone was cold, and it cast a long pale shadow that stretched eastward over them. The sun, a pale and watery yellow, was gleaming through the mist just above the west wall of the hollow in which they lay. North, south, and east, beyond the wall of fog, was thick, cold, and white. The air was silent, heavy, and chill. Their ponies were standing crowded together with their heads down. The hobbits sprang to their feet in alarm and ran to the western rim. They found that they were upon an island in the fog. Even as they looked out in dismay towards the setting sun, it sank before their eyes into a white sea, and a cold gray shadow sprang up in the east behind. Erroneous Goat, thank you very much. That is very, very generous, and thank you. Happy birthday from an old goat. We are both old goats. It is good to see you. How have you been, old friend? It seems like it has been a very long time since I have seen you. Oh shit. I just closed the book without a paper in it. Oh no, don't. Hey, you can interrupt anytime. Okay, I found the chapter. I think. Nope, I need to go further. Oh, don't worry about the thing interrupting. It is always good to be interrupted by a friend. Ribs, hello. Thank you, friend. Now we bring you this intermission as I try to find where I was, because I accidentally let the book close without my finger in it. Okay, I'm pretty sure this is the chapter. I will get there. Yes, that was very, very generous, Erroneous Goat. You have no idea how much that means to me that you stopped by and that you gifted subs. It's very kind. Okay, I found where I was. We'll put our piece of paper in the book so we don't do that again. Who am I kidding? I'll do it again. First we drink the vodka. Drinking ASMR, which can be another category. Alright, we will not do that again, I promise. That's right. It's not alcohol ASMR. Can't tell what I'm drinking. You can just probably hear me drinking it. I am using a straw like a civilized adult. They felt as if a trap was closing about them, but they did not quite lose heart. They still remembered the hopeful view they had had of the line of the road ahead, and they still knew in which direction it lay. In any case, they now had so great a distance for that hollow place about the stone that no thought of remaining there was in their minds. They packed up as quickly as their chilled fingers would work. Soon they were leading their ponies in single file over the rim and down the long northward slope of the hill, down into a foggy sea. Oh, what? I'm sorry, people, now, but... Stop it, Windows. My computer is haunted. It's asking me if I want to turn on a filter key. Oh, I don't want to turn on any keys. I just want to read my book. I just want to read my book. Here, I will move the keyboard farther away, where it will probably fall on the floor. This is definitely white. No, I didn't lose the page this time. Did not lose the page. Stay there, keyboard. Okay. I did not lose the page. I think I just maybe had maybe part of the book hit the keyboard. I don't know. It came up and said, "Do you want to activate the filter key?" It's like, I don't know what that is. Leave me alone, Windows. Okay. Soon they were leading their ponies in single file over the rim and down the long northward slope of the hill, down into a foggy sea. As they went down, the mist became colder and damper, and their hair hung lank and dripping on their foreheads. When they reached the bottom, it was so cold that they halted and got out cloaks and hoodies, which soon became bedewed with gray drops. Then, mounting their ponies, they went slowly on again, feeling their way by the rise and fall of the ground. They were steering, as well as they could guess, for the gate-like opening at the far northward end of the long valley which they had seen in the morning. Once they were through the gap, they had only to keep on in anything like a straight line, and they were bound in the end to strike the road. Their thoughts did not go beyond that, except for a vague hope that perhaps away beyond the downs there might be no fog. Found my index card, thank God. That wasn't part of the story. The hobbits didn't just find an index card. I should change my category. No. I would change my tags to, God damn it, I need the keyboard back. No, stop it, printer. I didn't do anything. It's the attack of technology. I'm not enjoying this reading aloud. I swear to God, nothing else had better do anything tonight. The printer's off, so I don't even know why it started up. 'Cause I don't have a keyboard. 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 I don't have a keyboard Alright. We shall continue on after being so rudely interrupted once again. Their going was very slow. To prevent their getting separated and wandering in different directions, they went in file with Frodo leading. I must give you some birthday bits as gifting subs is more expensive on mobile. Why is this Twitch? I don't understand. Behave technology, bad technology. Albel, thank you. Thank you so much, friend. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's because it goes through a different processor. I've never understood why subs are more expensive on mobile either. It's because they are bad. They are bad people. But thank you again, friend. That is very kind and generous of you, and it is very appreciated. I am kind of freaked out, though, because my printer is off. So I don't know why it all of a sudden started going into test mode. Anyway, more vodka. Alright. And we shall continue with our story. Their going was very slow. To prevent their getting separated and wandering in different directions, they went in file with Frodo leading. Sam was behind him, and after him came Pippin, and then Merry. The valley seemed to stretch on endlessly. Suddenly, Frodo saw a hopeful sign. On either side ahead, a darkness began to loom through the mist, and he guessed that they were at last approaching the gap in the hills, the north gate of the Barrow Downs. If they could pass that, they would be free. "Come on, follow me," he called back over his shoulder, and he hurried forward. But his hope soon changed to bewilderment and alarm. The dark patches grew darker, but they shrank, and suddenly he saw, towering ominous before him and leaning slightly towards one another, like the pillars of a headless door, two huge standing stones. He could not remember having seen any sign of these in the valley when he looked out from the hill in the morning. He had passed between them almost before he was aware, and even as he did so, darkness seemed to fall round him. His pony reared and snorted, and he fell off. When he looked back, he found that he was alone. The others had not followed him. "Sam," he called. "Pippin, Merry, come along. Why don't you keep up?" There was no answer. Fear took him, and he ran back past the stones, shouting wildly, "Sam! Sam! Merry! Pippin!" The pony bolted into the mist and vanished. From some way off, or so it seemed, he thought he heard a cry. "Hoy, Frodo, hoy!" He was away eastward, on his left, as he stood under the great stones, staring and straining into the gloom. He plunged off in the direction of the call and found himself going steeply uphill. As he struggled on, he called again, and kept on calling more and more frantically, but he heard no answer for some time, and then it seemed faint and far ahead and high above him. "Frodo, hoy!" came the thin voices out of the mist, and then a cry that sounded like "Help! Help!" often repeated, ending with a last "help" that trailed off into a long wail suddenly cut short. He stumbled forward with all the speed he could toward the cries, but the light was now gone, and clinging night had closed about him, so that it was impossible to be sure of any direction. He seemed all the time to be climbing up and up. Only the change in the level of the ground at his feet told him when he at last came to the top of a ridge or hill. He was weary, sweating, and yet chilled. It was wholly dark. "Where are you?" he cried out miserably. There was no reply. He stood listening. He was suddenly aware that it was getting very cold, and that up here a wind was beginning to blow, an icy wind. A change was coming in the weather. The mist was flowing past him now, in shreds and tatters. His breath was smoking, and the darkness was less near and thick. He looked up and saw with surprise that faint stars were appearing overhead amid the strands of hurrying cloud and fog. The wind began to hiss over the grass. He imagined suddenly that he caught a muffled cry, and he made towards it, and even as he went forward the mist was rolled up and thrust aside, and the starry sky was unveiled. A glance showed him that he was now facing southwards, and was on a round hilltop, which he must have climbed from the north. Out of the east the biting wind was blowing. To his right there loomed against the westward stars a dark black shape. A great barrow stood there. "Where are you?" he cried again, both angry and afraid. "Here," said a voice, deep and cold, that seemed to come out of the ground. "I am waiting for you." "No," said Frodo, but he did not run away. His knees gave, and he fell on the ground. Nothing happened, and there was no sound. Trembling, he looked up, in time to see a tall, dark figure like a shadow against the stars. It leaned over him. He thought there were two eyes, very cold, though lit with a pale light that seemed to come from some remote distance. Then a grip stronger and colder than iron seized him. The icy touch froze his bones, and he remembered no more. When he came to himself again, for a moment he could recall nothing, except a sense of dread. Then suddenly he knew that he was imprisoned, caught hopelessly. He was in a barrel. A barrel wight had taken him, and he was probably already under the dreadful spells of the barrel weiss, about which whispered tales spoke. He dared not move, but lay as he found himself, flat on his back upon a cold stone with his hands on his breast. But though his fear was so great that it seemed to be part of the very darkness that was round him, he found himself, as he lay thinking about Bilbo Baggins and his stories, of their jogging along together in the lanes of the Shire, and talking about roads and adventures. There was a seed of courage hidden, often deeply, it is true, in the heart of the fattest and most timid hobbit, waiting for some final and desperate danger to make it grow. Frodo was neither very fat nor very timid. Indeed, though he did not know it, Bilbo and Gandalf had thought him the best hobbit in the Shire. He thought he had come to the end of his adventure, and a terrible end, but the thought hardened him. He found himself stiffening, as if for a final spring. He no longer felt limp like a helpless prey. As he lay there, thinking and getting a hold of himself, he noticed all at once that the darkness was slowly giving way. A pale greenish light was growing round him. It did not at first show him what kind of place he was in, for the light seemed to be coming out of himself, and from the floor beside him, and had not yet reached the roof or wall. He turned, and there in the cold glow he saw lying beside him Sam, Pippin, and Merry. They were on their backs, and their faces looked deathly pale, and they were clad in white. About them lay many treasures, of gold maybe, though in that light they looked cold and unlovely. On their heads were circlets, gold chains were about their waists, and on their fingers were many rings. Swords lay by their sides, and shields were at their feet, but across their 3 necks lay one long, naked sword. Suddenly a song began, a cold murmur, rising and falling. The voice seemed far away and immeasurably dreary, sometimes high in the air and thin, sometimes like a low moan from the ground. Out of the formless stream of sad but horrible sounds, strings of word could now and again shape themselves. Grim, hard, cold words, heartless and miserable. The night was railing against the morning of which it was bereaved, and the cold was cursing the warmth for which it hungered. Frodo was chilled to the marrow. After a while the song became clearer, and with dread in his heart he perceived that it had changed into an incantation. Cold be hand and heart and home, and cold be sleep under stone. Never more to wake on story bed, never till the sun fails and the moon is dead. In the black wind the stars shall die, and still on gold here let them lie, till the dark Lord lifts his hand over dead sea and withered land. He heard behind his head a creaking and a scraping sound. Raising himself on one arm he looked, and saw now in the pale light that they were in a kind of passage, which behind them turned a corner. Round the corner a long arm was groping, walking on its fingers towards Sam, who was lying nearest, and towards the hilt of the sword that lay upon him. At first Frodo felt as if he had indeed been turned into stone by the incantation. Then a wild thought of escape came to him. He wondered if he put on the ring whether the Barrow-wight would miss him, and he might find some way out. He thought of himself running free over the grass, grieving for Merry and Sam and Pippin, but free and alive himself. Gandalf would admit that there had been nothing else he could do. Yeah, and I'm sorry if you guys heard that. Looks like my neighbors are shooting off fireworks now. This is a great night. So if you hear some loud booms, it's just the neighbors setting off fireworks. But the courage that had been awakened in him was now too strong. He could not leave his friends so easily. He wavered, groping in his pocket, and then fought with himself again, and as he did so the arm crept nearer, and then I hope it's fireworks. Yeah, it's fireworks, so the neighbors are killing each other. Yep, explosions equals America. Here in America. Okay. Once more. But the courage that had been awakened in him was now too strong. He could not leave his friends so easily. He wavered, groping in his pocket, and then fought with himself again, and as he did so the arm crept nearer. Suddenly resolve hardened in him, and he seized a short shovel. He seized a short sword, not a shovel, that lay beside him, and kneeling he stooped low over the bodies of his companions. With what strength he had, he hewed at the crawling arm near the wrist, and the hand broke off. But at the same moment the sword splintered up to the hilt. There was a shriek, and the light vanished. In the dark there was a snarling noise. Well, if they're killing each other, it will get quiet soon. I don't know. And they might not be good aims if they're shooting at each other. Frodo fell forward over Merry, and Merry's face felt cold. All at once, back into his mind, from which it had disappeared with the first coming of the fog, came the memory of the house down under the hill, and of Tom's singing. He remembered the rhyme that Tom had taught them. In a small, desperate voice he began, "Ho, Tom Bombadil," and with that name his voice seemed to grow strong. It had a full and lively sound, and the dark chamber echoed as if to drum and trumpet. Ho, Tom Bombadillo, by water, wood, and hill, by the reed and willow, by fire, sun, and moon, hearken now and hear us. Come, Tom Bombadil, for our need is near us. There was a sudden deep silence in which Frodo could hear his heart beating. After a long, slow moment, he heard plain, but far away, as if it was coming down through the ground or through thick walls, an answering voice singing. Old Tom Bombadil is a merry fellow, bright blue in his jacket, and his boots are yellow. None has ever caught him yet, for Tom he is the master. His songs are stronger songs, and his feet are faster. There was a loud rumbling sound, as of stones rolling and falling, and suddenly light streamed in, real light, the plain light of day. A low, door-like opening appeared at the end of the chamber beyond Frodo's feet, and there was Tom's head, hat, feather, and all, framed against the light of the sun, rising red behind him. The light fell upon the floor and upon the faces of the 3 hobbits lying beside Frodo. They did not stir, but the sickly hue had left them. They looked now as if they were only very deeply asleep. Tom stopped, removed his hat, and came into the dark chamber singing. "Get out, you old wight, vanish in the sunlight, shrivel like the cold mist, like the winds go wailing. Out into the barren lands far beyond the mountains. Come never here again, leave your barrow empty. Lost and forgotten be, darker than the darkness, where gates stand forever shut till the world is mended." At these words there was a cry, and part of the inner end of the chamber fell in with a crash. Then there was a long trailing shriek, fading away into an unguessable distance, and after that, silence. "Come, friend Frodo," said Tom. "Let us get out onto the clean grass. You must help me bear them." Together they carried out Merry, Pippin, and Sam. As Frodo left the barrow for the last time, he thought he saw a severed hand wriggling still, like a wounded spider, in a heap of fallen earth. Tom went back in again, and there was a sound of much thumping and stamping. When he came out, he was bearing in his arms a great load of treasure, things of gold, silver, copper, and bronze, many beads and chains and jeweled ornaments. He climbed the green barrow and laid them all on top in the sunshine. There he stood, with his hat in his hand and the wind in his hair, and looked down upon the 3 hobbits that had been laid on their backs upon the grass at the west side of the mound. Raising his right hand, he said in a clear and commanding voice, "Wake up now, my merry lads, wake up and hear me calling. Warm now be heart and limb, the cold stone is fallen. Dark door is standing wide, dead hand is broken. Night under night is flown, and the gate is open." To Frodo's great joy, the hobbits stirred, stretched their arms, rubbed their eyes, and then suddenly sprang up. They looked about in amazement, first at Frodo, and then at Tom, standing large as life on the barrow top above them, and then at themselves in their thin white rags, crowned and belted with pale gold and jingling with trinkets. "What in the name of wonder," began Merry, feeling the golden circlet that had slipped over one eye. Then he stopped, and a shadow came over his face, and he closed his eyes. "Of course I remember," he said. "The men of Carn Dûm came on us at night, and we were worsted. Ah, the spear in my heart." He clutched at his breast. No, he said, opening his eyes. "What am I saying? I have been dreaming. Where did you get to, Frodo?" "I thought that I was lost," said Frodo, "but I don't want to speak of it. Let us think of what we are to do now. Let us go on." "Dressed up like this, sir," said Sam. "Where are my clothes?" He flung the circlet, belt, and rings on the grass and looked round helplessly, as if he expected to find his cloak, jacket, and breeches, and other hobbit garments laying somewhere to hand. "You won't find your clothes again," said Tom, bounding down from the mound and laughing as he danced round them in the sunlight. One would have thought that nothing dangerous or dreadful had happened, and indeed the horror faded out of their hearts as they looked at him and saw the merry glint in his eyes. "What do you mean?" asked Pippin, looking at him half puzzled and half amused. "Why not?" But Tom shook his head, saying, "You found yourselves again, out of the deep water. Clothes are but little loss if you escape from drowning. Be glad, my merry friends, and let the warm sunlight heat now heart and limb. Cast off these cold rags, run naked on the grass while Tom goes a-hunting." He sprang away downhill, whistling and calling. Looking down after him, Frodo saw him running away southwards along the green hollow between their hill and the next, still whistling and crying. "Hey now, come hoy now, whither do you wander? Up, down, near or far, here, there, or yonder? Sharp ears, wise nose, swish tail, and bumpkin, white socks, my little lad, and old fatty lumpkin." So he sang, running fast, tossing up his hat and catching it, until he was hidden by a fold of the ground. But for some time his "hey now, ho now" came floating back down the wind, which had shifted round towards the south. The air was growing very warm again. The hobbits ran about for a while in the grass as he told them. Then they lay basking in the sun with the delight of those that have been wafted suddenly from bitter winter to a friendly clime, or of people that, after being long ill and bedridden, wake one day to find that they are unexpectedly well and the day is again full of promise. By the time that Tom returned, they were feeling strong and hungry. He reappeared hat first over the brow of the hill, and behind him came in an obedient line 6 ponies, their own 5 and 1 more. The last was plainly old Fatty Lumpkin. He was larger, stronger, fatter, and older than their own ponies. Mary, to whom the others belonged, had not, in fact, given them any such names, but they answered to the new names that Tom had given them for the rest of their lives. Tom called them one by one, and they climbed over the brow and stood in a line. Then Tom bowed to the hobbits. "Here are your ponies now," he said. "They've more sense, in some ways, than you wandering hobbits have. More sense in their noses. For they sniff danger ahead, which you walk right into. And if they run to save themselves, then they run the right way. You must forgive them all. For though their hearts are faithful, to face fear of Barrow-wights is not what they were made for. See, here they come again, bringing all their burdens." Merry, Sam, and Pippin now clothed themselves in spare garments from their packs, and they soon felt too hot, for they were obliged to put on some of the thicker and warmer things that they had brought against the oncoming winter. "Where does that other old animal, that Fatty Lumpkin, come from?" asked Frodo. "He's mine," said Tom. "My 4-legged friend, though I seldom ride him, and he wanders often far, free, upon the hillsides. When your ponies stayed with me, they got to know my Lumpkin, and they smelt him in the night, and quickly ran to meet him. I thought he'd look for them, and with his words of wisdom take all their fear away. But now, my jolly Lumpkin, old Tom's going to ride. Hey, he's coming with you, just to set you on the road, so he needs a pony. For you cannot easily talk to hobbits that are riding when you're on your own legs trying to trot beside them." The hobbits were delighted to hear this, and thanked Tom many times. But he laughed, and said that they were so good at losing themselves that he would not feel happy till he had seen them safe over the borders of the land. "I've got things to do," he said. "My making and my singing, my talking and my walking, and my watching of the country. Tom can't be always near to open doors and willow cracks. Tom has his house to mind, and Goldberry is waiting." It was still fairly early by the sun, something between 9 and 10, and the hobbits turned their minds to food. Their last meal had been lunch beside the Standing Stone the day before. They breakfasted now off the remainder of Tom's provisions, meant for their supper, with additions that Tom had brought with him. It was not a large meal, considering hobbits and the circumstances, but they felt much better for it. While they were eating, Tom went up to the mound and looked through the treasures. Most of these he made into a pile that glistened and sparkled on the grass. He bade them lie there, free to all finders, birds, beasts, elves, or men, and all kindly creatures, for so the spell of the mound should be broken and scattered, and no wight ever come back to it. He chose for himself from the pile a brooch set with blue stones, many shaded like flax flowers or the wings of blue butterflies. He looked long at it, as if stirred by some memory, shaking his head, and saying at last, "Here is a pretty toy for Tom and for his lady. Fair was she who long ago wore this on her shoulder. Goldberry shall wear it now, and we will not forget her." For each of the hobbits he chose a dagger, long, leaf-shaped, and keen, of marvelous workmanship, damasked with serpent forms in red and gold. They gleamed as he drew them from their black sheaths, wrought of some strange metal, light and strong, and set with many fiery stones. Whether by some virtue in these sheaths, or because of the spell that lay on the mound, the blades seemed untouched by time, unrusted, sharp, glittering in the sun. "Old knives are long enough as swords for hobbit people," he said. "Sharp blades are good to have, if shire folks go walking east, south, or far away into dark and danger." Then he told them that these blades were forged many long years ago by men of Westernesse. They were foes of the Dark Lord, but they were overcome by the evil king of Carn Dûm in the land of Angmar. Few now remember them, Tom murmured. Yet still some go wandering, sons of forgotten kings walking in loneliness, guarding from evil things folks that are heedless. The hobbits did not understand his words, but as he spoke they had a vision as it were of a great expanse of years behind them, like a vast shadowy plain over which there strode shapes of men, tall and grim, with bright swords, and last came one with a star on his brow. Then the vision faded, and they were back in the sunlit world. It was time to start again. They were ready, packing their bags and lading their ponies. Their new weapons they hung on their leather belts under their jackets, feeling them very awkward and wondering if they would be of any use. Fighting had not before occurred to any of them as one of the adventures in which their flight, would land them. At last they set off. They led their ponies down the hill, and then mounting they trotted quickly along the valley. They looked back and saw the top of the old mound on the hill, and from it the sunlight on the gold went up like a yellow flame. Then they turned a shoulder of the downs, and it was hidden from view. Though Frodo looked about him on every side, he saw no sign of the great stone standing like a gate, and before long they came to the northern gap and rode swiftly through, and the land fell away before them. It was a merry journey with Tom Bombadil trotting gaily beside them, or before them on Fatty Lumpkin, who could move much faster than his girth promised. Tom sang most of the time, but it was chiefly nonsense, or else perhaps a strange language unknown to the hobbits, an ancient language whose words were mainly those of wonder and delight. They went forward steadily, but they soon saw that the road was further away than they had imagined. Even without a fog, their sleep at midday would have prevented them from reaching it until after nightfall on the day before. The dark line they had seen was not a line of trees, but a line of bushes growing on the edge of a deep dike, with a steep wall on the further side. Tom said that it had once been the boundary of a kingdom, but a very long time ago. He seemed to remember something sad about it, and would not say much. They climbed down and out of the dike and through a gap in the wall, and then Tom turned due north, for they had been bearing somewhat to the west. The land was now open and fairly level, and they quickened their pace, but the sun was already sinking low when at last they saw a line of tall trees ahead, and they knew that they had come back to the road after many unexpected adventures. They galloped their ponies over the last furloughs, and halted under the long shadows of the trees. They were on the top of a sloping bank, and the road, now dim as evening drew on, wound away below them. At this point it ran nearly from southwest to northeast, and on their right it fell quickly down into a wide hollow. It was rutted and bore many signs of the recent heavy rain. There were pools and potholes full of water. They rode down the bank and looked up and down. There was nothing to be seen. "Well, here we are again at last," said Frodo. "I suppose we haven't lost more than 2 days by my shortcut through the forest, but perhaps the delay will prove useful. It may have put them off our trail." The others looked at him. The shadow of the fear of the Black Riders came suddenly over them again. Ever since they had entered the forest, they had thought chiefly of getting back to the road. Only now, when it lay beneath their feet, did they remember the danger which pursued them, and was more than likely to be laying in wait for them upon the road itself. They looked anxiously back towards the setting sun, but the road was brown and empty. "Do you think," asked Pippin hesitantly, "do you think we may be pursued tonight?" "No, I hope not tonight," answered Tom Bombadil, "nor perhaps the next day. But do not trust my guess, for I cannot tell for certain. Out east my knowledge fails. Tom is not master of riders from the Black Land far beyond his country." All the same, the hobbits wished he was coming with them. They felt that he would know how to deal with the Black Riders if anyone did. They would soon now be going forward into lands wholly strange to them, and beyond all but the most vague and distant legends of the Shire, and in the gathering twilight they longed for home. A deep loneliness and sense of loss was on them. They stood silent, reluctant to make the final parting, and only slowly became aware that Tom was wishing them farewell and telling them to have good heart and to ride on till dark without halting. Tom will give you good advice till this day is over. After that your own luck must go with you and guide you. 4 miles along the road you'll come upon a village, Bree under Bree Hill, with doors looking westward. There you'll find an old inn called the Prancing Pony. Barlaam Butterbur is the worthy keeper. There you can stay the night, and afterwards the morning will speed you upon your way. Be bold, but be wary. Keep up your merry hearts, and ride to meet your fortune. They begged him to come at least as far as the inn and drink once more with them, but he laughed and refused, saying, Tom's country ends here. He will not pass the borders. Tom has his house to mind, and Goldberry is waiting. Then he turned, tossed up his hat, leapt on Lumpkin's back, and rode up over the bank and away, singing into the dust. The hobbits climbed up and watched him until he was out of sight. I am sorry to take leave of Master Bombadil, said Sam. He is a caution, and no mistake. I reckon we may go a good deal further, and see naught better nor queerer. But I won't deny I'll be glad to see this prancing pony he spoke of. I hope it'll be like the Green Dragon away back home. What sort of folk are they in Bree? There are hobbits in Bree, said Mary, as well as big folk. I dare say it will be home-like enough. The pony is a good inn by all accounts. My people ride out there now and again. It may be all we could wish, said Frodo, but it is outside the Shire all the same. Don't make yourselves too much at home. Please remember, all of you, that the name of Baggins must not be mentioned. I am Mr. Underhill, if any name must be given. They now mounted their ponies and rode off silently into the evening. Darkness came down quickly as they plodded slowly downhill and up again, until at last they saw lights twinkling some distance ahead. Before them rose Bree Hill, barring the way, a dark mass against misty stars, and under its western flank nestled a large village. Toward it they now hurried, desiring only to find a fire and a door between them and the night. That is the end of that chapter. I have not heard any more explosions or possible gunshots, so here's hoping. I'll take the small victories at this point. I'm going to take a quick break because I still have to get Mom settled into bed and give her pills and her shots and everything. Tom Bombadil definitely MVP, yes. Yes, I do like this book. I am going to take a quick break, maybe, hopefully, only about 10 minutes. I promise I will not get more vodka. I am putting an index card in the book so that I don't lose my place. Hopefully none of the electronics act up again. And yeah, the index card is the MVP. Hopefully the goblins stay away. I will be back in a little bit. So everybody stretch and get yourself some drinks or some snacks. And I will be back.
Waiting for the rain. My to just surrender. I'm not holding back for anyone. Waiting for the rain. Waiting for the rain. I'm not holding back for anyone. Waiting for the rain. I'm not holding back for anyone. I've been holding on forever, waiting for the rain to come. Who am I to just surrender? I'm not holding back for anyone. I've been holding on forever, waiting for the rain to come. Who am I to just surrender? I'm not holding back for anyone. I've been holding on forever, waiting for the rain to come. Who am I to just surrender? I'm not holding back for anyone. I've been holding on forever, waiting for the rain to come. Who am I to just surrender? I'm not holding back for anyone. Holding up for, waiting for the rain. Am I to just surrender? I'm not holding back for anyone. Waiting for the rain.
just need to tell you something that just can't wait. Hey, maybe you'll ride away or maybe you'll stay. But hey, this old guitar and me been thinking for days how to say that our love don't care too much for the unpaid bills on the bedroom floor. Our love lives on cheap wine and singing songs to a wasted sunrise. With you, with you I feel like I am. With you, with you I feel like I am somebody, somebody, somebody. With you I feel like I am somebody, somebody, somebody. With you I feel like I am somebody in control, like I feel in my bones, like I'm somebody, somebody, somebody. With you I feel like I am. Come with me from New York to LA. Hey, we'll play this song in every city we stay. And hey, maybe we'll stream 1,000,000 times in one day. Be on our way. Hey, 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 hey. Our love don't care too much for the unpaid bills on the bedroom floor. Our love lives on cheap wine and singing songs to a wasted sunrise. With you, with you I feel like I'm. With you, with you I feel like I am somebody, somebody, somebody. Somebody, somebody, somebody. Somebody in control, like I feel in my bones, like I'm somebody, somebody, somebody. With you I feel like I am. So we made it in New York and LA, and how they sang in every city we played. I hear we streamed 1,000,000 times yesterday. Oh, how things change, and how the years keep ticking away, and how I wish that you were with me today. 'Cause I'd give anything to do it again. Oh, how we've changed. With you I feel like I'm somebody, somebody, somebody. With you I feel like I'm somebody, somebody, somebody. With you I feel like I'm somebody in control, like I feel in my bones, like I'm somebody, somebody, somebody. With you I feel like I am.
On most nights, I'm just wearing my pajamas, staying up too late, 'cause I'm watching Futurama, thinking where's my drama, My life's no melodrama, leave it off the screen, 'cause it's got no genre. Sometimes I call my mama, ring, yeah, she's always my armor. I want to fly away, far from my mistakes. My baggage has too much weight, hey, hey. So my bed is where I stay. Tell the clouds that I say hey. which way. Ay, ay. So my bed is where I stay.
Hello, friends. I found my way back. And I still didn't lose my place in the book. I hope that you all had a good break. Alright, we had some vodka water. We shall continue with our reading. Chapter 9. At the Sign of the Prancing Pony. Bree was the chief village of the Breeland, a small inhabited region like an island in the empty lands round about. I didn't break anything. I did bounce off a wall, but I didn't break it. Nor did I break myself. So we're good. Besides Bree itself, there was Staddle on the other side of the hill, Combe in a deep valley a little further eastward, and Archet on the edge of the Chetwood. Lying round Bree Hill and the villages was a small country of roads and tamed woodland only a few miles broad. 0 breakage stream. I don't think that I'm gonna try to turn my fan on and hope it doesn't make too much noise. Because I don't want to turn my air conditioner back on. So if the fan is too distracting, let me know. The men of Bree were brown-haired, broad, and rather short, cheerful and independent. They belonged to nobody but themselves, but they were more friendly and familiar with hobbits, dwarves, elves, and other inhabitants in the world about them than was or is usual with big people. According to their own tales, they were the original inhabitants and were the descendants of the first men that ever wandered into the west of the Middle World. Few had survived the turmoils of the elder days, but when the kings returned again over the great sea, they had found the Bree men still there, and they were still there now when the memory of the old kings had faded into the grass. In those days, no other men had settled dwellings so far west or within 100 leagues of the Shire. But in the wild lands beyond Bree, there were mysterious wanderers. The Bree folk called them rangers and knew nothing of their origin. They were taller and darker than the men of Bree, and were believed to have strange powers of sight and hearing, and to understand the languages of beasts and birds. They roamed at will southwards and eastwards, even as far as the Misty Mountains, but they were now few and rarely seen. When they appeared, they brought news from afar, and told strange, forgotten tales which were eagerly listened to, but the Bree folk did not make friends of them. There were also many families of hobbits in the Bree land, and they claimed to be the oldest settlement of hobbits in the world, one that was founded long before even the Brandywine was crossed and the Shire colonized. They lived mostly in Staddle, though there were some in Bree itself, especially on the higher slopes of the hill above the houses of the men. The big folk and the little folk, as they called one another, were on friendly terms, minding their own affairs in their own ways, but both rightly regarded themselves as necessary parts of the Bree folk. Nowhere else in the world was this peculiar but excellent arrangement to be found. The Bree folk, big and little, did not themselves travel much, and the affairs of the 4 villages were their chief concern. Occasionally the hobbits of Bree went as far as Buckland, or the East Farthing, but though their little land was not much further than a day's riding east of the Brandywine Bridge, the hobbits of the Shire now seldom visited it. An occasional Bucklander or adventurous took might come out to the inn for a night or two, but even that was becoming less and less usual. The Shire hobbits referred to those of Bree and to any others that lived beyond the borders as outsiders, and took very little interest in them, considering them dull and uncouth. There were probably many more outsiders scattered about in the west of the world in those days than the people of the Shire imagined. Some doubtless were no better than tramps, ready to dig a hole in any bank and stay only as long as it suited them. But in the Bree land, at any rate, the hobbits were decent and prosperous, and no more rustic than most of their distant relatives inside. It was not yet forgotten that there had been a time when there was much coming and going between the Shire and Bree. There was Bree blood in the Brandybucks, by all accounts. The village of Bree had some 100 stone houses of the big folk, mostly above the road, nestling on the hillside with windows looking west. On that side, running in more than half a circle from the hill and back to it, there was a deep dike with a thick hedge on the inner side. Over this the road crossed by a causeway, but where it pierced the hedge it was barred by a great gate. There was another gate in the southern corner where the road ran out of the village. The gates were closed at nightfall, but just inside them were small lodges for the gatekeepers. Down on the road, where it swept to the right to go round the foot of the hill, there was a large inn. It had been built long ago, when the traffic on the roads had been far greater. For Bree stood at an old meeting of ways. Another ancient road crossed the east road just outside the dike at the western end of the village, and in former days men and other folk of various sorts had traveled much on it. Strange as news from Bree was still a saying in the East Farthing, descending from those days when news from north, south, and east could be heard in the inn, and when the Shire hobbits used to go more often to hear it. But the northern lands had long been desolate, and the north road was now seldom used. It was grass-grown, and the Bree folk called it the Greenway. The inn of Bree was still there, however, and the innkeeper was an important person. His house was a meeting place for the idle, talkative, and inquisitive among the inhabitants, large and small, of the 4 villages, and a resort of rangers and other wanderers, and for such travelers, mostly dwarfs, are still journeyed on the east road to and from the mountains. It was dark, and white stars were shining when Frodo and his companions came at last to the Greenway crossing and drew near the village. They came to the west gate and found it shut, but at the door of the lodge beyond it there was a man sitting. He jumped up and fetched a lantern and looked over the gate at them in surprise. "What do you want, and where do you come from?" he asked gruffly. "We are looking for the inn here," answered Frodo. "We are journeying east and cannot go further tonight." "Hobbits! 4 hobbits! And what's more, out of the Shire by their talk," said the gatekeeper, softly, as if speaking to himself. He stared at them darkly for a moment, and then slowly opened the gate and let them ride through. "We don't often see Shire folk riding on the road at night," he went on, as they halted a moment by his door. "You'll pardon my wondering what business takes you away east of Bree. What may your names be, might I ask?" "Our names and our business are our own, and this does not seem a good place to discuss them," said Frodo, not liking the look of the man, nor the tone of his voice. "Your business is your own, no doubt," said the man, "but it's my business to ask questions after nightfall." "We are hobbits from Buckland, and we have a fancy to travel and to stay at the inn here," put in Merry. "I am Mr. Brandybuck. Is that enough for you? The Bree folk used to be fair-spoken to travelers, or so I had heard." All right, said the man. "I meant no offense. But you'll find maybe that more folk than old Harry at the gate will be asking you questions. There's queer folk about. If you go on to the pony, you'll find you're not the only guests." He wished them good night, and they said no more, but Frodo could see in the lantern light that the man was still eyeing them curiously. He was glad to hear the gate clang to behind them as they rode forward. He wondered why the man was so suspicious and whether anyone had been asking for news of a party of hobbits. Could it have been Gandalf? He might have arrived while they were delayed in the forest and the downs, but there was something in the look and the voice of the gatekeeper that made him uneasy. The man stared after the hobbits for a moment, and then he went back to his house. As soon as his back was turned, a dark figure climbed quickly in over the gate and melted into the shadows of the village street. The hobbits rode on up a gentle slope, passing a few detached houses, and drew up outside the inn. The houses looked large and strange to them. Sam stared up at the inn with its 3 stories and many windows, and felt his heart sink. He had imagined himself meeting giants taller than trees and other creatures even more terrifying, sometime or other in the course of his journey, but at the moment he was finding his first sight of men and their tall horses quite enough. Indeed, too much for the dark end of a tiring day. He pictured black horses standing, all saddled in the shadows of the inn yard, and black riders peering out of dark upper windows. "We surely aren't going to stay here for the night, are we, sir?" he exclaimed. "If there are hobbit folk in these parts, why don't we look for some that would be more willing to take us in? It would be more homelike." "What's wrong with the inn?" said Frodo. "Tom Bombadil recommended it. I expect it's homelike enough inside." Even from the outside, the inn looked a pleasant house to familiar eyes. It had a front on the road and 2 wings running back on land, partly cut out of the lower slopes of the hills, so that the rear of the 2nd floor windows were level with the ground. There was a wide arch leading to a courtyard between the 2 wings, and on the left under the arch there was a large doorway reached by a few broad steps. The door was open and light streamed out of it. Above the arch there was a lamp, and behind it swung a large signboard. A fat white pony reared up on its hind legs. Over the door was painted in white letters, "The Prancing Pony" by Barlaam Butterbur. Many of the lower windows showed lights behind thick curtains. As they hesitated outside in the gloom, someone began singing a merry song inside, and many cheerful voices joined loudly in the chorus. They listened to this encouraging sound for a moment, and then got off their ponies. The song ended, and there was a burst of laughter and clapping. They led their ponies under the arch, and leaving them standing in the yard, they climbed up the steps. Frodo went forward and nearly bumped into a short fat man with a bald head and a red face. He had a white apron on and was bustling out of one door and in through another, carrying a tray laden with full mugs. "Can we—" began Frodo. "Half a minute, if you please," shouted the man over his shoulder, and vanished into a babble of voices and a cloud of smoke. In a moment he was out again, wiping his hands on his apron. "Good evening, little master," he said, bending down. "What may you be wanting?" "Beds for 4, and stabling for 5 ponies, if that can be managed. Are you Mr. Butterbur?" "That's right. Barlaam is my name. Barlaam Butterbur, at your service. You're from the Shire, eh?" he said, and then suddenly he clapped his hand to his forehead, as if trying to remember something. "Hobbits!" he cried. "Now what does that remind me of? May I ask your name, sir?" "Mr. Took and Mr. Brandybuck," said Frodo, "and this is Sam Gamgee. My name is Underhill." "There now," said Mr. Butterbur, snapping his fingers. "It's gone again. But it'll come back when I have time to think. I'm right off my feet, but I'll see what I can do for you. We don't often get a party out of the Shire nowadays, and I should be sorry not to make you welcome. But there's such a crowd already in the house tonight, as there hasn't been for long enough. It never rains but pours, as we say in Bree." "Hi, Nob," he shouted. "Where are you, you woolly-footed slow-coach? Nob!" "Coming, sir, coming." A cheery-looking hobbit bobbed out of the door, and seeing the travelers, stopped short and stared at them with great interest. "Where's Bob?" asked the landlord. "You don't know? Well, find him. Double sharp. I haven't got 6 legs, nor 6 eyes either. Tell Bob there's 5 ponies that have to be stabled. He must find room somehow." Nob trotted off with a grin and a wink. "Well, now, what was I going to say?" said Mr. Butterbur, tapping his forehead. "One thing drives out another, so to speak. I'm that busy tonight, my head is going round. There's a party that came up the Greenway from down south last night. and that was strange enough to begin with. Then there's a traveling company of dwarves going west come in this evening, and now there's you. If you weren't hobbits, I doubt we would make house for you. But we've got a room or two in the north wing that was made special for hobbits when this place was built. On the ground floor, as they usually prefer, round windows and all as they like. I hope you'll be comfortable. You'll be wanting supper, I don't doubt, as soon as may be. This way now. He led them a short way down a passage and opened a door. Here is a nice little parlor, he said. I hope it will suit. Excuse me now, I'm that busy. No time for talking. I must be trotting. It's hard work for 2 legs, but I don't get thinner. I'll come in again. If you want anything, ring the handbell and Nob will come. If you don't come, ring and shout. Off he went at last, and left them feeling rather breathless. He seemed capable of an endless stream of talk, however busy he might be. They found themselves in a small and cozy room. There was a bit of bright fire burning on the hearth, and in front of it were some low and comfortable chairs. There was a round table already spread with a white cloth, and on it was a large handbell. But Nob, the hobbit's servant, came bustling in long before they thought of ringing. He brought candles and a tray full of plates. "Will you be wanting anything to drink, masters?" he asked. "And shall I show you the bedrooms while your supper is got ready?" They were washed and in the middle of good deep mugs of beer when Mr. Butterbar and Nob came in again. In a twinkling the table was laid. There was hot soup, cold meats, a blackberry tart, new loaves, slabs of butter, and half a ripe cheese. Good plain food, as good as the Shire could show, and homelike enough to dispel the last of Sam's misgivings, already much relieved by the excellence of the beer. The landlord hovered round for a while, and then prepared to leave them. "I don't know whether you would care to join the company when you have supped," he said, standing at the door. "Perhaps you would rather go to your beds. Still, the company would be very pleased to welcome you, if you had a mind. We don't get outsiders, travelers from the Shire, I should say, begging your pardon, often, and we like to hear a bit of news, or any story or song you may have in mind. But as you please, ring the bell if you lack anything." So refreshed and encouraged did they feel at the end of their supper, about 3/4 of an hour's steady going, not hindered by unnecessary talk, that Frodo, Pippin, and Sam decided to join the company. Merry said it would be too stuffy. "I shall sit here quietly by the fire for a bit, and perhaps go out later for a sniff of the air. Mind your P's and Q's, and don't forget that you were supposed to be escaping in secret, and are still on the high road, and not very far from the Shire." "All right," said Pippin. "Mind yourself. Don't get lost, and don't forget that it is safer indoors." The company was in the big common room of the inn. The gathering was large and mixed, as Frodo discovered, when his eyes got used to the light. This came chiefly from a blazing log fire, for the 3 lamps hanging from the beams were dim, and half veiled in smoke. Barlaam Butterbur was standing near the fire, talking to a couple of dwarves and 1 or 2 strange-looking men. On the benches were various folk, men of Bree, a collection of local hobbits, sitting chatting together, a few more dwarves, and other vague figures difficult to make out away in the shadows and corners. As soon as the Shire hobbits entered, there was a chorus of welcome from the Breelanders. The strangers, especially those that had come up the greenway, stared at them curiously. The landlord introduced the newcomers to the Bree folk so quickly that, though they caught many names, they were seldom sure who the names belonged to. The men of Bree seemed to all have rather botanical, and to the Shire folk rather odd, names, like Rushlight, Goatleaf, Heathertoes, Appledore, Thistlewold, and Ferny, not to mention Butterbur. Some of the hobbits had similar names. The Mugworts, for instance, seemed numerous, but most of them had natural names, such as Banks, Brockhouse, Longholes, Sandheaver, and Tunnelly, many of which were used in the Shire. There were several Underhills from Straddle, and as they could not imagine sharing a name without being related, they took Frodo to their hearts as a long-lost cousin. The Bree hobbits were, in fact, friendly and inquisitive, and Frodo soon found that some explanation of what he was doing would have to be given. He gave out that he was interested in history and geography, at which there was much wagging of heads, although neither of these words were much used in the Bree dialect. He said he was thinking of writing a book, at which there was silent astonishment, and that he and his friends wanted to collect information about hobbits living outside the Shire, especially in the eastern lands. At this, a chorus of voices broke out. If Frodo had really wanted to write a book and had had many ears, he would have learned enough for several chapters in a few minutes. And if that was not enough, he was given a whole list of names, beginning with old Barlaam here, to whom he could go for further information. But after a time, as Frodo did not show any sign of writing a book on the spot, the hobbits returned to their questions about doings in the Shire. Frodo did not prove very communicative, and he soon found himself sitting alone in a corner, just listening and looking around. The men and dwarves were mostly talking of distant events and telling news of a kind that was becoming only too familiar. There was trouble away in the south, and it seemed that the men who had come up the Greenway were on the move, looking for lands where they could find some peace. The Bree folk were sympathetic, but plainly not very ready to take a large number of strangers into their little land. One of the travelers, a squint-eyed, ill-favored fellow, was foretelling that more and more people would be coming north in the near future. If room isn't found for them, they'll find it for themselves. They've a right to live, same as other folk, he said loudly. The local inhabitants did not look pleased at the prospect. The hobbits did not pay much attention to all this, and it did not at the moment seem to concern hobbits. Big folk could hardly beg for lodging in hobbit holes. They were more interested in Sam and Pippin, who were now feeling quite at home and were chatting gaily about events in the Shire. Pippin roused a good deal of laughter with an account of the collapse of the roof of the town hall in Mickle Delving. Will Whitfoot, the mayor, and the fattest hobbit in the West Farthing had been buried in chalk and came out like a floured dumpling. But there were several questions asked that made Frodo a little uneasy. One of the Breelanders, who seemed to have been in the Shire several times, wanted to know where the Underhills lived and who they were related to. Suddenly Frodo noticed that a strange-looking, weather-beaten man, sitting in the shadows near the wall, was also listening intently to the hobbit talk. He had a tall tankard in front of him and was smoking a long-stemmed pipe curiously carved. His legs were stretched out before him, showing high boots of supple leather that fitted him well, but had seen much wear and were now caked with mud. A travel-stained cloak of heavy dark green cloth was drawn close about him, and in spite of the heat of the room, he wore a hood that overshadowed his face, but the gleam of his eyes could be seen as he watched the hobbits. "Who is that?" Frodo asked when he got a chance to whisper to Mr. Butterbur. "I don't think you introduced him." "Him," said the landlord in an answering whisper, cocking an eye without turning his head. "I don't rightly know. He is one of the wandering folk. Rangers, we call them. He seldom talks. Not but what he can tell a rare tale when he has the mind. He disappears for a month or a year, and then he pops up again. He was in and out pretty often last spring, but I haven't seen him round lately. What his right name is I've never heard, but he's known round here as Strider. Goes about at a great pace on his long shanks, though he don't tell nobody what cause he has to hurry. But there's no accounting for east and west, as we say in Bree, meaning the Rangers and the Shire folk, begging your pardon. Funny you should ask about him." But at that moment Mr. Butterbar was called away by a demand for more ale, and his last remark remained unexplained. Frodo found that Strider was now looking at him, as if he had heard or guessed all that had been said. Presently, with a wave of his hand and a nod, he invited Frodo to come over and sit by him. As Frodo drew near, he threw back his hood, showing a shaggy head of dark hair, flecked with gray, and in a pale, stern face a pair of keen gray eyes. "I am called Strider," he said in a low voice. "I am very pleased to meet you, Master Underhill, if old Butterbur got your name right." "He did," said Frodo stiffly. He felt far from comfortable under the stare of those keen eyes. "Well, Master Underhill," said Strider, "if I were you, I should stop your young friends from talking too much. Drink, fire, and chance meeting are pleasant enough, but, well, this isn't the Shire. There are queer folk about. Though I say it as I shouldn't, you may think," he added with a wry smile. seeing Frodo's glance. "And there have been even stranger travelers through Bree lately," he went on, watching Frodo's face. Frodo returned his gaze, but said nothing, and Strider made no further sign. His attention seemed suddenly to be fixed on Pippin. To his alarm, Frodo became aware that the ridiculous young Took, encouraged by his success with the fat mayor of Mickle Delving, was now actually giving a comic account of Bilbo's farewell party. He was already giving an imitation of the speech and was drawing near to the astonishing disappearance. Frodo was annoyed. It was a harmless enough tale for most of the local hobbits, no doubt. Just a funny story about those funny people way beyond the river. But some, old Butterbur, for instance, knew a thing or two, and he probably heard rumors long ago about Bilbo's vanishing. It would bring the name of Baggins to their minds, especially if there had been inquiries in Bree after that name. Frodo fidgeted, wondering what to do. Pippin was evidently much enjoying the attention he was getting, and had become quite forgetful of their danger. Frodo had a sudden fear that in his present mood he might even mention the ring, and that, well, would be disastrous. "You had better do something quick," whispered Strider in his ear. Frodo jumped up and stood on a table and began to talk. The attention of Pippin's audience was disturbed. Some of the hobbits looked at Frodo and laughed and clapped, thinking that Mr. Underhill had taken as much ale as was good for him. Frodo suddenly felt very foolish, and found himself, as was his habit when making a speech, fingering the things in his pocket. He felt the ring on its chain, and quite unaccountably the desire came over him to slip it on and vanish out of the silly situation. It seemed to him somehow as if the suggestion came to him from outside, from someone or something in the room. He resisted the temptation firmly and clasped the ring in his hand, as if to keep a hold on it and prevent it from escaping or doing any mischief. At any rate, it gave him no inspiration. He spoke a few suitable words, as they would have said in the Shire. "We are all very much gratified by the kindness of your reception, and I venture to hope that my brief visit will help to renew the old ties of friendship between the Shire and Bree." And then he hesitated and coughed. Everyone in the room was now looking at him. "A song!" shouted one of the hobbits. A song! Shouted all the others. "Come on now, master. Sing us something that we haven't heard before." For a moment, Frodo stood gaping. Then, in desperation, he began a ridiculous song that Bilbo had been rather fond of, and indeed rather proud of, for he had made up the words himself. It was about an inn, and that is probably why it came to Frodo's mind just then. Here it is in full. Only a few words of it are now, as a rule, remembered. "There is an inn, a merry old inn, beneath an old grey hill, and there they brew a beer so brown that the man in the moon himself came down one night to drink his fill. The ostler has a tipsy cat that plays a 5-stringed fiddle, and up and down he runs his bow, now squeaking high, now purring low, now sawing in the middle. The landlord keeps a little dog that is mighty fond of jokes. When there's good cheer among the guests, he cocks an ear at all the guests, and laughs until he chokes. They also keep a horned cow, as proud as any queen, but music turns her head like ale, and makes her wave her tufted tail, and dance upon the green. And oh, the rows of silver dishes, and the store of silver spoons. For Sunday there's a special pair, and these they polish up with care on Saturday afternoon. The man in the moon was drinking deep, and the cat began to wail. A dish and a spoon on the table danced, the cow in the garden madly pranced, and the little dog chased his tail. The man in the moon took another mug, and then rolled beneath his chair, and there he dozed and dreamed of ale, till in the sky the stars were pale, and dawn was in the air. Then the ostler said to his tipsy cat, the white horse of the moon, they neigh and champ their silver bits, but their master's been and drowned his wits, and the sun'll be rising soon. So the cat on his fiddle played hey diddle diddle, a jig that would wake the dead. He squeaked and sawed and quickened the tune when the landlord shook the man in the moon. "It's after 3, he said. They rolled the man slowly up the hill and bundled him into the moon. while his horses galloped up in rear, and the cow came capering like a deer, and a dish ran up with a spoon. Now quicker the fiddle went diddle-dee-diddle, the dog began to roar. The cow and the horses stood on their heads, the guests all bounded from their beds and danced upon the floor. With a ping and a pong the fiddle strings broke, the cow jumped over the moon, and the little dog laughed to see such fun, with the Saturday dish went off at a run with the silver Sunday spoon. The round moon rolled behind the hill as the sun raised up her head. She hardly believed her fiery eyes, for though it was day, to her surprise, they all went back to bed. There was a loud and long applause. Frodo had a good voice, and the song tickled their fancy. "Where's old Barley?" they cried. "He ought to hear this. Bob ought to learn his cat the fiddle, and then we'd have a dance." They called for more ale and began to shout, "Let's have it again, master. Come on now, once more." They made Frodo have another drink, and then begin his song again, while many of them joined in, for the tune was well known, and they were quick at picking up words. It was now Frodo's turn to feel pleased with himself. He capered about on the table, and when he came a second time to "The Cow Jumped Over the Moon," he leapt into the air, much too vigorously, for he came down, bang, with a tray full of mugs, and slipped and rolled off the table with a crash, clatter, and bump. The audience all opened their mouths wide for laughter, and stopped short in gaping silence, for the singer disappeared. He simply vanished, as if he had gone slap through the floor without leaving a hole. The local hobbits stared in amazement, and then sprang to their feet and shouted for Barlaman. All the company drew away from Pippin and Sam, who found themselves left alone in a corner, and eyed darkly and doubtfully from a distance. It was plain that many people regarded them now, as there was one swarthy Bree-lander who stood looking at them with a knowing and half-mocking expression that made them feel very uncomfortable. Presently he slipped out of the door, followed by the squint-eyed southerner. The two had been whispering together a good deal during the evening. Harry the gatekeeper also went out, just behind them. Frodo felt a fool. Not knowing what else to do, he crawled away under the tables to the dark corner by Strider, who sat unmoved, giving no sign of his thoughts. Frodo leaned back against the wall and took off the ring. How it came to be on his hand he could not tell. He could only suppose that he had been handling it in his pocket while he sang, and that somehow it had slipped on when he stuck out his hand with a jerk to save his fall. For a moment he wondered if the ring itself had not played him a trick. Perhaps it had tried to reveal itself in response to some wish or command that was felt in the room. He did not like the looks of the men that had gone out. "Well," said Strider when he reappeared, "why did you do that? Worse than anything your friends could have said. You have put your foot in it. Or should I say your finger?" "I don't know what you mean," said Frodo, annoyed and alarmed. "Oh, yes, you do," answered Strider. "But we had better wait until the uproar has died down. Then, if you please, Mr. Baggins, I should like a quiet word with you." "What about?" asked Frodo, ignoring the sudden use of his proper name. "A matter of some importance to us both," answered Strider, looking Frodo in the eye. "You may hear something to your advantage." "Very well," said Frodo, trying to appear unconcerned. "I'll talk to you later." Meanwhile, an argument was going on by the fireplace. Mr. Butterbur had come trotting in, and he was now trying to listen to several conflicting accounts of the event at the same time. "I saw him, Mr. Butterbur," said a hobbit. "Or leastwise I didn't see him, if you take my meaning. He just vanished into thin air, in a manner of speaking." "You don't say, Mr. Mugwort," said the landlord, looking puzzled. "Yes, I do," replied Mugwort, "and I mean what I say. What's more—" "There's some mistake somewhere," said Butterbur, shaking his head. "There's too much of that Mr. Underhill to go vanishing into thin air, or into thick air, as is more likely in this room." "Well, where is he now?" cried several voices. "How should I know? He's welcome to go where he will, so long as he pays in the morning. There's Mr. Took now. He's not vanished. Well, I saw what I saw, and I saw what I didn't, said Muckwort obstinately. And I say there's some mistake, replied Butterbur, picking up the tray and gathering up the broken crockery. Of course there's a mistake, said Frodo. I haven't vanished. Here I am. I've just been having a few words with Strider in the corner. He came forward into the firelight, but most of the company backed away, even more perturbed than before. They were not in the least satisfied by his explanation that he had crawled away quickly under the tables after he had fallen. Most of the hobbits and the men of Bree went off then, in a huff, having no fancy for further entertainment that evening. One or two gave Frodo a black look and departed, muttering among themselves. The dwarves and the 2 or 3 strange men that still remained got up and said good night to the landlord, but not to Frodo and his friends. Before long, no one was left but Strider, who sat on, unnoticed, by the wall. Mr. Butterbur did not seem much put out. He reckoned very probably that his house would be full again on many future nights, until the present mystery had been thoroughly discussed. Now what have you been doing, Mr. Underhill? He asked. Frightening my customers and breaking up my crocks with your acrobatics? I am very sorry to have caused such trouble, said Frodo. It was quite unintentional, I assure you. A most unfortunate accident. All right, Mr. Underhill, but if you're going to do any more tumbling or conjuring or whatever it was, you'd best warn folk ahead of time. And warn me. We're a bit suspicious round here of anything out of the way. Uncanny, if you understand me. We don't take to it all of a sudden. I shan't be doing anything of the sort again, Mr. Butterbur, I promise. And now I think I'll be getting to bed. We shall be making an early start. You see that our ponies are ready by 8 o'clock. Very good. But before you go, I would like a word with you in private, Mr. Underhill. Something has just come to my mind that I ought to tell you. I hope you'll not take it amiss. When I've seen to a thing or two, I'll come along to your room if you're willing. Certainly, said Frodo, but his heart sank. He wondered how many private talks he would have before he got to bed, and what they would reveal. Were these people all in league against him? He began to suspect even old Butterbur's fat face of concealing dark designs. Chapter 10. Strider. Frodo, Pippin, and Sam made their way back to the parlor. There was no light. Merry was not there, and the fire had burned low. It was not until they puffed up the embers into a blaze and thrown on a couple of faggots that they discovered Strider had come with them. There he was, calmly sitting in a chair by the door. "Hullo," said Pippin. "Who are you, and what do you want?" "I am called Strider," he answered. "And though he may have forgotten it, your friend promised to have a quiet talk with me." "You said I might hear something to my advantage, I believe," said Frodo. "What have you to say?" "Several things," answered Strider, "but of course I have my price." "What do you mean?" asked Frodo sharply. "Don't be alarmed. I mean just this. I will tell you what I know and give you some good advice, but I shall want a reward." "And what will that be, pray?" said Frodo. He suspected now that he had fallen in with a rascal, and he thought uncomfortably that he had brought only a little money with him. All of it would hardly satisfy a rogue, and he could not spare any of it. "No more than you can afford," answered Strider with a slow smile, as if he guessed Frodo's thoughts. "Just this. You must take me along with you until I wish to leave you." "Oh, indeed," said Frodo, surprised, but not much relieved. "Even if I wanted another companion, I should not agree to any such thing until I know a good deal more about you and your business." "Excellent," exclaimed Strider, crossing his legs and sitting back comfortably. "You seem to be coming to your senses again, and that is all to the good. You have been much too careless so far. Very well, I will tell you what I know, and leave the reward to you. You may be glad to grant it when you have heard me." "Go on, then," said Frodo. "What do you know?" "Too much. Too many dark things," said Strider grimly. "But as for your business—" He got up and went to the door, opened it quickly, and looked out. Then he shut it quietly and sat down again. I have quick ears, he went on, lowering his voice, and though I cannot disappear, I have hunted many wild and wary things, and I can usually avoid being seen if I wish. Now, I was behind the hedge this evening on the road west of Bree, when 4 hobbits came out of the downlands. I need not repeat all that they said to old Bombadil or to one another, but one thing interested me. Please remember, said one of them, that the name Baggins must not be mentioned. I am Mr. Underhill, if any name must be given. That interested me so much that I followed them here. I slipped over the gate, just behind them. Maybe Mr. Baggins has an honest reason for leaving his name behind, but if so, I should advise him and his friends to be more careful. I don't see what interest my name has anyone in Bree, said Frodo angrily, and I have still to learn why it interests you. Mr. Strider may have an honest reason for spying and eavesdropping, but if so, I should advise him to explain it. Well answered, said Strider, laughing, but the explanation is simple. I was looking for a hobbit called Frodo Baggins. I wanted to find him quickly. I had learned that he was carrying out of the Shire a, secret that concerned me and my friends. Now don't mistake me, he cried, as Frodo rose from his seat and Sam jumped up with a scowl. I shall take more care of this secret than you do, and care is needed. He leaned forward and looked at them. Watch every shadow, he said in a low voice. Black horsemen have passed through Bree. On Monday one came down the Greenway, they say, and another appeared later, coming up the Greenway from the south. There was a silence. At last Frodo spoke to Pippin and Sam. I ought to have guessed it from the way the gatekeeper greeted us, he said, and the landlord seems to have heard something. Why did he press us to join the company, and why on earth did we behave so foolishly? We ought to have stayed quiet in here. It would have been better, said Strider. I would have stopped your going into the common room if I could, but the innkeeper would not let me in to see you or take a message. Do you think he... began Frodo. No, I don't think any harm of old Butterbur. Only he does not altogether like mysterious vagabonds of any sort. Frodo gave him a puzzled look. Well, I have a rather rascally look, have I not? Said Strider, with a curl of his lip and a queer gleam in his eye. But I hope we shall get to know one another better. When we do, I hope you will explain what happened at the end of your song. For that little prank, it was sheer accident, interrupted Frodo. I wonder, said Strider. Accident, then. That accident has made your position dangerous. Hardly more than it was already, said Frodo. I knew these horsemen were pursuing me, but now at any rate they seem to have missed me and to have gone away. You must not count on that, said Strider sharply. They will return, and more are coming. There are others. I know their number. I know these riders. He paused, and his eyes were cold and hard. And there are some folk in Bree who are not to be trusted, he went on. Bill Ferny, for instance. He has an evil name in the Bree land, and queer folk call it his house. You must have noticed him among the company. A swarthy, sneering fellow. He was very close with one of the southern strangers, and they slipped out together just after your accident. Not all of those southerners mean well, and as for Ferny, he would sell anything to anybody to make mischief for entertainment. What will Ferny sell, and what has my accident got to do with him? Asked Frodo, still determined not to understand Strider's hints. News of you, of course, answered Strider. An account of your performance will be very interesting to certain people. After that, they would hardly need to be told your real name. It seems to me only too likely that they will hear of it before this night is over. Is that enough? You can do as you like about my reward, take me as a guide or not, but I may say I have wandered over them for many years. I am older than I look. I might prove useful. You will have to leave the open road after tonight, for the horsemen will watch it night and day. You may escape from Bree and be allowed to go forward while the sun is up, but you won't go far. They will come on you in the wild, in some dark place where there is no help. Do you wish them to find you? They are terrible." The hobbits looked at him and saw with surprise that his face was drawn as if with pain, and his hands clenched the arms of his chair. The room was very quiet and still, and the light seemed to have grown dim. For a while he sat with unseeing eyes, as if walking in distant memory or listening to sounds in the night far away. "There," he cried after a moment, drawing his hand across his brow. "Perhaps I know more about these pursuers than you do. You fear them, but you do not fear them enough yet. Tomorrow you will have to escape if you can. Strider can take you by paths that are seldom trodden. Will you have him?" There was heavy silence. Frodo made no answer. His mind was confused with doubt and fear. Sam frowned and looked at his master, and at last he broke out. "With your leave, Mr. Frodo, I'd say no. This Strider here, he warns and he says take care, and I say yes to that, and let's begin with him. He comes out of the wild, and I never heard no good of such folk. He knows something, that's plain, and more than I like, but it's no reason why we should let him go leading us out into some dark place far from help, as he puts it." Pippin fidgeted and looked uncomfortable. Strider did not reply to Sam, but turned his keen eyes on Frodo. Frodo caught his glance and looked away. "No," he said slowly. "I don't agree. I think you are not really as you choose to look. You began to talk to me like the Bree folk, but your voice has changed. Still, Sam seems right in this. I don't see why you should warn us to take care, and yet ask us to take you on trust. Why the disguise? Who are you? What do you really know about my business, and how do you know it?" "The lesson in caution has been well learned," said Strider with a grim smile. "But caution is one thing, and wavering is another. You will never get to Rivendell now on your own, and to trust me is your only chance. You must make up your mind. I will answer some of your questions if that will help you to do so. But why should you believe my story if you do not trust me already? Still, here it is." At that moment there came a knock at the door. Mr. Butterbur had arrived with candles, and behind him was Nob with cans of hot water. Strider withdrew into a dark corner. "I've come to bid you good night," said the landlord, putting the candles on the table. "Nob, take the water to the rooms." He came in and shut the door. "It's like this," he began, hesitating and looking troubled. "If I've done any harm, I'm sorry indeed. But one thing drives out another, as you'll admit, and I'm a busy man. But first one thing and then another this week have jogged my memory, as the saying goes, and not too late, I hope. You see, I was asked to look out for hobbits of the Shire, and for one by the name of Baggins in particular." "And what has that got to do with me?" asked Frodo. "Ah, you know best," said the landlord knowingly. "I won't give you away, but I was told that this Baggins would be going by the name of Underhill, and I was given a description that fits you well enough, if I may say so." "Indeed, let's have it then," said Frodo, unwisely interrupting. "A stout little fellow with red cheeks," said Mr. Butterbur solemnly. Pippin chuckled, but Sam looked indignant. "That won't help you much. It goes for most hobbits, Barley, he says to me," continued Mr. Butterbur with a glance at Pippin. "But this one is taller than some, and fairer than most, and he has a cleft in his chin, perky chap with a bright eye. Begging your pardon, but he said it, not me." "He said it? And who was he?" asked Frodo eagerly. "Ah, that was Gandalf, if you know what I mean, if you know who I mean. A wizard, they say he is, but he's a good friend of mine, whether or no. But now I don't know what he'll have to say to me. If I see him again, turn all my ale sour or me into a block of wood, I shouldn't wonder. He's a bit hasty. Still, what's done can't be undone." "Well, what have you done?" said Frodo, getting impatient with the slow unraveling of Butterbur's thoughts. "Where was I?" said the landlord, pausing and snapping his fingers. "Ah, yes, old Gandalf. 3 months back he walked right into my room without a knock. 'Barley,' he says, 'I'm off in the morning. Will you do something for me? You've only to name it,' I said. "I'm in a hurry," said he, "and I've no time myself, but I want a message took to the Shire. Have you anyone you can send and trust to it?" "I can find someone," I said. "Tomorrow, maybe, or the day after." "Make it tomorrow," he says, and then he gave me a letter. "It's addressed plain enough," said Mr. Butterbur, producing a letter from his pocket and reading out the address slowly and proudly. He valued his reputation as a lettered man. Mr. Frodo Baggins, Bag End, Hobbiton in the Shire. "A letter for me from Gandalf," cried Frodo. "Ah," said Mr. Butterbur, "then your right name is Baggins." "It is," said Frodo, "and you had better give that letter at once and explain why you've never sent it. That's what you came to tell me, I suppose. They've taken a long time to come to the point." Poor Mr. Butterbur looked troubled. "You're right, master," he said, "and I beg your pardon, and I'm mortal afraid of what Gandalf will say if harm comes of it. But I didn't keep it back a purpose. I put it by safe. Then I couldn't find nobody willing to go to the Shire next day, or the day after, and none of my own folk were to spare, and then one thing after another drove it out of my mind. I'm a busy man. I'll do what I can to set matters right, and if there's any help I can give, you've only to name it." Leaving the letter aside, I promised Gandalf no less. "Barley," he says to me, "this friend of mine from the Shire, he may be coming out this way before long, him and another. He'll be calling himself Underhill. Mind that, but you need ask no questions, and if I'm not with him, he may be in trouble, and he may need help. Do whatever you can for him, and I'll be grateful," he says. "And here you are, and trouble is not far off, seemingly." "What do you mean?" asked Frodo. "These black men," said the landlord, lowering his voice. "They're looking for Baggins, and if they mean well, then I'm a hobbit. It was on Monday, and all the dogs were yammering and the geese screaming. Uncanny, I called it. Nob, he came and told me that 2 black men were at the door asking for a hobbit named Baggins. Nob's hair was all stood on end. I bid the black fellows be off, and slammed the door on them, but they've been asking the same question all the way to Archet. And that Ranger Strider, he's been asking questions too. Tried to get in here to see you before you'd had a bite or sup, he did." "He did," said Strider suddenly, coming forward into the light, "and much trouble would have been saved if you had let him in, Barlaman." The landlord jumped with surprise. "You," he cried. "You're always popping up. What do you want now?" "He's here with my leave," said Frodo. "He came." God damn it. Now the page turned on me. I will find my place, I promise. "He's here with my leave," said Frodo. "He came to offer me his help." "Well, you know your business, maybe," said Mr. Butterbur, looking suspiciously at Strider. "But if I was in your plight, I wouldn't take up with a ranger." "Then who would you take up with?" asked Strider. "A fat innkeeper who only remembers his own name because people shouted at him all day? They cannot stay in the pony forever, and they cannot go home. They have a long road before them. Will you go with them and keep the black men off?" "Me? Leave Bree? I wouldn't do that for any money," said Mr. Butterbur, looking really scared. "And why can't you stay here quiet for a bit, Mr. Underhill? What are all these queer goings-on? What are these black men after, and where do they come from? I'd like to know." "I'm sorry I can't explain it all," answered Frodo. "I am tired and very worried, and it's a long tale. But if you mean to help me, I ought to warn you that you will be in danger as long as I am in your house. These black riders, I am not sure, but I fear they come from Mordor," said Strider in a low voice. "From Mordor, Barlaman, if that means anything to you." "Save us," cried Mr. Butterbur, turning pale. The name evidently was known to him. "This is the worst news that has come to Bree in my time." "It is," said Frodo. "Are you still willing to help me?" I am, said Mr. Butterbur, more than ever, though I don't know what the likes of me can do against, he faltered. Against the shadow in the east, said Strider quietly. Not much, Barlaman, but every little helps. You can let Mr. Underhill stay here tonight as Mr. Underhill, and you can forget the name of Baggins till he is far away. I'll do that, said Butterbur, but they'll find out he's here without help from me, I'm afraid. It's a pity Mr. Baggins drew attention to himself this evening, to say no more. The story of that Mr. Bilbo's going off has been heard before tonight in Bree. Even our Nob has been doing some guessing in his slow pate, and there are others in Bree quicker in the uptake than he is. Well, we can only hope the riders won't come back yet, said Frodo. I hope not, indeed, said Butterbur. But spooks or no spooks, they won't get in the pony so easy. Don't you worry till the morning. Nob'll say no word. No black man shall pass my doors while I can stand on my legs. Me and my folk will keep watch tonight, but you had best get some sleep if you can. In any case, we must be called at dawn, said Frodo. We must get off as early as possible. Breakfast at 6:30, please. Right, I'll see to the orders, said the landlord. Good night, Mr. Baggins. Underhill, I should say. Good night. Now, bless me. Where's your Mr. Brandybuck? I don't know, said Frodo with sudden anxiety. They had forgotten all about Merry, and it was getting late. I'm afraid he is out. He said something about going for a breath of air. Well, you do want looking after, and no mistake, your party might be on a holiday, said Butterbur. I must go and bar the doors quick, but I'll see your friend is let in when he comes. I'd better send Nob to look for him. Good night to you all. At last Mr. Butterbur went out, with another doubtful look at Strider, and a shake of his head. His footsteps retreated down the passage. Well, said Strider, when are you going to open that letter? Frodo looked carefully at the seal before he broke it. It certainly seemed to be Gandalf's. Inside, written in the wizard's strong but graceful script, was the following message. The Prancing Pony, Bree, Mid-Year's Day, Shire Year 1418. Dear Frodo, bad news has reached me here. I must go off at once. You had better leave Bag End soon and get out of the Shire before the end of July at latest. I will return as soon as I can, and I will follow you, if I find that you are gone. Leave a message for me here if you pass through Bree. You can trust the landlord Butterbur. You may meet a friend of mine on the road, a man lean, dark, tall by some called Ryder. He knows our business and will help you. Make for Rivendell. There I hope we may meet again. If I do not come, Elrond will advise you. Yours in haste, Gandalf. P.S. Do not use it again, not for any reason whatsoever. Do not travel by night. P.P.S. Make sure it is the real Strider. There are many strange men on the roads. His true name is Aragorn. All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither. Deep roots that are reached by the frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken. A light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be blade that was broken. The crownless again shall be king. P.P.P.S. I hope Butterbur sends this promptly. A worthy man, but his memory is like a lumber room. Things wanted, always buried. If he forgets, I shall roast him. Farewell. Frodo read the letter to himself, then passed it to Pippin and Sam. Really, old Butterbur has made a mess of things, he said. He deserves roasting. If I had got this at once, we might have been safe in Rivendell by now. But what can have happened to Gandalf? He writes as if he was going into great danger. He's been doing that for many years, said Strider. Frodo turned and looked at him thoughtfully, wondering about Gandalf's second postscript. Why didn't you tell me you were Gandalf's friend at once? He asked. It would have saved time. Would it? Would any of you have believed me till now? Said Strider. I knew nothing of this letter. For all I knew, I had to persuade you to trust me without proofs, if I was to help you. In any case, I do not intend to tell you all about myself at once. I had to study you first and make sure of you. The enemy has set traps for me before now. As soon as I had made up my mind, I was ready to tell you whatever you asked, but I must admit," he added with a queer laugh, "that I hoped you would take to me for my own sake. A hunted man sometimes wearies of distress and longs for friendship, but there I believe my looks are against me." "They are, at first sight at any rate," laughed Pippin, a sudden relief after reading Gandalf's letter. "But handsome is as handsome does, and we say in the Shire, and I dare say we shall all look much the same after lying for days in hedges and ditches." "It would take more than a few days or weeks or years of wandering in the wild to make you look like Strider," he answered. "And you would die first, unless you were made of sterner stuff than you look to be." Pippin subsided, but Sam was not daunted, and he still eyed Strider dubiously. "How do we know you are the Strider that Gandalf speaks about?" he demanded. "You never mentioned Gandalf till this letter came out. You might be a play-acting spy, for all I could see, trying to get us to go with you. You might have done in the real Strider and took his clothes. What have you to say to that?" "That you are a stout fellow," answered Strider. "But I'm afraid my only answer to you, Sam Gamgee, is this. If I had killed the real Strider, I could kill you, and I should have killed you already without so much talk. If I was after the ring, I could have it now." He stood up and seemed suddenly to grow taller. In his eyes gleamed a light, keen and commanding. Throwing back his cloak, he laid his hand on the hilt of a sword that hung concealed by his side. They did not dare to move. Sam sat wide-mouthed, staring at him dumbly. "But I am the real Strider, fortunately," he said, looking down at them, with his face softened by a sudden smile. "I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and if by life or death I can save you, I will." There was a long silence. At last Frodo spoke with hesitation. "I believed that you were a friend before the letter came," he said, "or at least I wished to. You have frightened me several times tonight, but never in the way the servants of the enemy would, or so I imagine. I think one of his spies would, well, seem fairer and feel fouler, if you understand." "I see," laughed Strider. "I look foul and feel fair. Is that it? All that is gold does not glitter, not all those who wander are lost." "Did the verses apply to you, then?" asked Frodo. "I could not make out what they were about. But how did you know that they were in Gandalf's letter, if you had not seen it?" "I did not know," he answered, "but I am Aragorn, and those verses go with that name." He drew out his sword, and they saw that the blade was indeed broken a foot below the hilt. "Not much use, is it, Sam?" said Strider. "But the time is near when it shall be forged anew." Sam said nothing. "Well," said Strider, "with Sam's permission, we will call that settled. Strider shall be your guide. We shall have a rough road tomorrow. Even if we are allowed to leave Bree unhindered, we can hardly hope now to leave it unnoticed, but I shall try to get lost as soon as possible. I know one or two ways out of Breeland other than the main road. If once we shake off the pursuit, I shall make for Weathertop." "Weathertop," said Sam. "What's that?" "It is a hill just to the north of the road, about halfway from here to Rivendell. It commands a wide view all round, and there we shall have a chance to look about us. Gandalf will make for that point if he follows us. After Weathertop, our journey will become more difficult, and we shall have to choose between various dangers." "When did you last see Gandalf?" asked Frodo. "Do you know where he is, or what he is doing?" Strider looked grave. "I do not know," he said. "I came west with him in the spring. I have often kept watch on the borders of the Shire in the last few years, when he was busy elsewhere. He seldom left it unguarded. We last met on the 1st of May at Sarn Ford down the Brandywine. He told me that his business with you had gone well, and that you would be starting for Rivendell in the last week of September. As I knew he was at your side, I went away on a journey of my own, and that has proved ill. for plainly some news reached him, and I was not at hand to help. I am troubled for the first time since I have known him. We should have had messages, even if he could not come himself. When I returned many days ago, I heard the ill news. The tidings had gone far and wide that Gandalf was missing and the horseman had been seen. It was the elven folk at Gilder that told me this, and later they told me that you had left your home. There was no news of your leaving Buckland. I have been watching the East Road anxiously. Do you think the Black Riders have anything to do with it? With Gandalf's absence, I mean, asked Frodo. I do not know of anything else that could have hindered him, except the enemy himself, said Strider. But do not give up hope. Gandalf is greater than you Shire folks know. As a rule, you can only see his jokes and joys. But this business of ours will be his greatest task. Pippin yawned. I am sorry, he said, but I am dead tired. In spite of all the danger and worry, I must go to bed. Or sleep where I sit. Where is that silly fellow Merry? It would be the last straw if we had to go out in the dark to look for him. At that moment they heard a door slam. Then feet came running along the passage. Merry came in with a rush, followed by Nob. He shut the door hastily and leaned against it. He was out of breath. They stared at him in alarm for a moment before he gasped. I have seen them, Frodo. I have seen them. Black Riders. Black Riders, cried Frodo. Where? Here, in the village. I stayed indoors for an hour. Then, as you did not come back, I went out for a stroll. I had come back again, and was standing just outside the light of the lamp looking at the stars. Suddenly I shivered and felt that something horrible was creeping near. There was a sort of deeper shade among the shadows across the road, just beyond the edge of the lamplight. It slid away at once into the dark without a sound. There was no horse. Which way did it go? Asked Strider, suddenly and sharply. Merry started, noticing the stranger for the first time. Go on, said Frodo. This is a friend of Gandalf's. I will explain later. It seemed to make off up the road, eastward, continued Merry. I tried to follow. Of course it vanished almost at once, but I went round the corner and on as far as the last house on the road. Strider looked at Merry with wonder. You have a stout heart, he said, but it was foolish. I don't know, said Merry. Neither brave nor silly, I think. I could hardly help myself. I seemed to be drawn somehow. Anyway, I went, and suddenly I heard voices by the hedge. One was muttering, and the other was whispering or hissing. I couldn't hear a word that was said. I did not creep any closer, because I began to tremble all over. Then I felt terrified, and I turned back. I was just going to bolt home when something came behind me, and I fell over. I found him, sir, put in Nob. Mr. Butterbur sent me out with a lantern. I went down to Westgate, and then came back up towards Southgate. Just nigh Bill Ferny's house, I thought I could see something in the road. I couldn't swear to it, but it looked to me as if two men were stooping over something, lifting it. I gave a shout, but when I got up to the spot there was no signs of them, and only Mr. Brandybuck lying by the roadside. He seemed to be asleep. I thought I had fallen into deep water, he says to me when I shook him. Very queer he was, and as soon as I had roused him, he got up and ran back here like a hare. I am afraid that's true, said Merry, though I don't know what I said. I had an ugly dream which I can't remember. I went to pieces. I don't know what came over me. I do, said Strider. The Black Breath. The riders must have left their horses outside and passed back through the south gate in secret. They will know all the news now, for they have visited Bill Ferny, and probably that southerner was a spy as well. Something may happen in the night before we leave Bree. What will happen? Said Merry. Will they attack the inn? No, I think not, said Strider. They are not all here yet, and in any case that is not their way. In dark and loneliness they are strongest. They will not openly attack a house where there are lights and many people. Not until they are desperate. Not while all the long leaves of Eriador still lie before us. But their power is in terror, and already some in Bree are in their clutch. They will drive these wretches to some evil work. Ferny and some of the strangers, and maybe the gatekeeper too. They had words with Harry at Westgate on Monday. I was watching them. He was white and shaking when they left him. We seem to have enemies all around, said Frodo. What are we to do? Stay here and do not go to your rooms. They are sure to have found out which those are. The Hobbit rooms have windows looking north and close to the ground. We will all remain together and bar this window and the door. But first, Nob and I will fetch your luggage. While Strider was gone, Frodo gave Merry a rapid account of all that had happened since supper. Merry was still reading and pondering Gandalf's letter when Strider and Nob returned. Well, masters, said Nob, I've ruffled up the clothes and put in a bolster down the middle of each bed, and I made a nice imitation of your head with a brown woolen mat, Mr. Underhill, sir, he added with a grin. Pippin laughed. Very lifelike, he said, but what will happen when they have penetrated the disguise? We shall see, said Strider. Let us hope to hold the fort till morning. Good night to you, said Nob, and went off to take his part in the watch on the doors. Their bags and gear they piled on the parlor floor. They pushed a low chair against the door and shut the window. Peering out, Frodo saw the Bree Hill. He then closed and barred the heavy inside shutters and drew the curtains together. Strider built up the fire and blew out the candles. The hobbits lay down on their blankets with their feet toward the hearth, but Strider settled himself in the chair against the door. They talked for a little, for Merry still had several questions to ask. Jumped over the moon, chuckled Merry as he rolled himself in his blanket. Very ridiculous of you, Frodo, but I wish I had been there to see. The worthies of Bree will be discussing it 100 years hence. I hope so, said Strider. Then they all fell silent, and one by one the hobbits dropped off to sleep. Chapter 11. A Knife in the Dark. As they prepared for sleep in the inn at Bree, darkness lay on Buckland. A mist strayed in the dells and along the river bank. The house at Crick Hollow stood silent. Fatty Bulger opened the door cautiously and peered out. A feeling of fear had been growing on him all day, and he was unable to rest or go to bed. There was a brooding threat in the breathless night air. As he stared out into the gloom, a black shadow moved under the trees. The gate seemed to open of its own accord and close again without a sound. Terror seized him. He shrank back, and for a moment he stood trembling in the hall. Then he shut and locked the door. The night deepened. There came the soft sound of horses led with stealth along the lane. Outside the gate they stopped, and 3 black figures entered, like shades of night creeping across the ground. One went to the door, one to the corner of the house on either side, and there they stood, as still as the shadows of stones, while night went slowly on. The house and the quiet trees seemed to be waiting breathlessly. There was a faint stir in the leaves, and a cock crowed far away. The cold hour before dawn was passing. The figure by the door moved. In the dark, without moon or stars, a drawn blade gleamed, as if a chill light had been unsheathed. There was a blow, soft but heavy, and the door shuddered. "Open, in the name of Mordor," said a voice, thin and menacing. At a second blow, the door yielded and fell back, with timbers burst and lock broken. The black figures passed swiftly in. At that moment, among the trees nearby, a horn rang out. It rent the night like fire on a hilltop. Awake! Fear! Fire! Foes! Awake! Fatty Bulger had not been idle. As soon as he saw the dark shapes creep from the garden, he knew that he must run for it or perish. And run he did, out of the back door, through the garden, and over the fields. When he reached the nearest house, more than a mile away, he collapsed on the doorstep. "No, no, no," he was crying. "No, not me. I haven't got it." It was some time before anyone could make out what he was babbling about. At last they got the idea that enemies were in Buckland, some strange invasion from the old forest, and then they lost no more time. The Brandybucks were blowing the horn call of Buckland that had not been sounded for 100 years, not since the white wolves came in the fell winter when the Brandywine was frozen over. Awake, awake. Far away answering horns were heard. The alarm was spreading. The black figures fled from the house. One of them let fall a hobbit cloak on the step as he ran. In the lane the noise of hoofs broke out, and gathering to a gallop went hammering away into the darkness. All about Crick Hollow there was the sound of horns blowing and voices crying and feet running, but the black riders rode like a gale to the north gate. Let the little people blow. Sauron would deal with them later. Meanwhile they had another errand. They knew now that the house was empty and the ring had gone. They rode down the guards at the gate and vanished from the Shire. In the early night, Frodo woke from deep sleep, suddenly, as if some sound or presence had disturbed him. He saw that Strider was sitting alert in his chair. His eyes gleamed in the light of the fire, which had been tended and was burning brightly, but he made no sign or movement. Frodo soon went to sleep again, but his dreams were again troubled with the noise of wind and of galloping hoofs. The wind seemed to be curling round the house and shaking it, and far off he heard a horn blowing wildly. He opened his eyes and heard a cock crowing lustily in the inn-yard. Strider had drawn the curtains and pushed back the shutters with a clang. The first grey light of day was in the room, and a cold air was coming through the open window. As soon as Strider had roused them all, he led the way to their bedrooms. When they saw them, they were glad that they had taken his advice. The windows had been forced open and were swinging, and the curtains were flapping. The beds were tossed about, and the bolsters slashed and flung upon the floor. The brown mat was torn to pieces. Strider immediately went to fetch the landlord. Poor Mr. Butterbur looked sleepy and frightened. He had hardly closed his eyes all night, so he said, but he had never heard a sound. "Never has such a thing happened in my time," he cried, raising his hands in horror. "Guests unable to sleep in their beds, and good bolsters ruined and all. What are we coming to?" "Dark times," said Strider. "But for the present you may be left in peace when you have got rid of us. We will leave at once. Never mind about breakfast. A drink and a bite standing will have to do. We shall be packed in a few minutes." Mr. Butterbur hurried off to see their ponies were got ready and to fetch them a bite, but very soon he came back in dismay. The ponies had vanished. The stable doors had all been opened in the night, and they were gone, not only Mary's ponies, but every other horse and beast in the place. Frodo was crushed by the news. How could they hope to reach Rivendell on foot, pursued by mounted enemies? They might as well set out for the moon. Strider sat silent for a while, looking at the hobbits, as if he was weighing up their strength and courage. "Ponies would not help us escape horsemen," he said at last, thoughtfully, as if he guessed what Frodo had in mind. "We should not come much in any case. It is the food and stores that trouble me. We cannot count on getting anything to eat between here and Rivendell, except what we take with us, and we ought to take plenty to spare, for we may be delayed or forced to go round about, far out of the direct way. How much are you prepared to carry on your backs?" "As much as we must," said Pippin with a sinking heart, but trying to show that he was tougher than he looked or felt. "I can carry enough for 2, said Sam defiantly. "Can't anything be done, Mr. Butterbur?" asked Frodo. Can't we get a couple of ponies in the village? Or even one just for the baggage? I don't suppose we could hire them, but we might be able to buy them, he added, doubtfully, wondering if he could afford it. I doubt it, said the landlord unhappily. The 2 or 3 riding ponies that there were in Bree were stabled in my yard, and they're gone. As for other animals, horses or ponies for draught or whatnot, there are very few of them in Bree, and they won't be for sale. But I'll do what I can. I'll round out Bob and send him round as soon as may be. Yes, said Strider reluctantly. You had better do that. I am afraid we shall have to try to get 1 pony at least, but so ends all hope of starting early and slipping away quietly. We might as well have blown a horn to announce our departure. That was part of their plan, no doubt. There is one crumb of comfort, said Mary, and more than a crumb, I hope. We can have breakfast while we wait, and sit down to it. Let's get hold of Nob. In the end, there were more than 3 hours delay. Bob came back with a report that no horse or pony was to be got for love or money in the neighborhood except one. Bill Fernie had one that he might possibly sell. A poor old half-starved creature it is, said Bob, but he won't part with it for less than thrice its worth, seeing how we were placed. Not if I know Bill Fernie. Bill Fernie, said Frodo. Isn't there some trick? Wouldn't the beast bolt back to him with all our stuff or help in tracking us or something? I wonder, said Strider, but I cannot imagine any animal running home to him once it got away. I fancy this is only an afterthought of kind Master Fernie's, just a way of increasing his profits from the affair. The chief danger is that the poor beast is probably at death's door, but there does not seem any choice. What does he want for it? Bill Fernie's price was 12 silver pennies, and that was indeed at least 3 times the pony's value in those parts. It proved to be a bony, underfed, and dispirited animal, but it did not look like dying just yet. Mr. Butterbur paid for it himself and offered Mary another 18 pence as some compensation for the lost animals. He was an honest man, and well off as things were reckoned in Bree, but 30 silver pennies was a sore blow to him, and being cheated by Bill Fernie made it harder to bear. As a matter of fact, he came out on the right side in the end. It turned out later that only 1 horse had actually been stolen. The others had been driven off or had bolted in terror and were found wandering in different corners of the Bree land. Mary's ponies had escaped altogether, and eventually, having a good deal of sense, they made their way to the downs in search of Fatty Lumpkin. So they came under the care of Tom Bombadil for a while and were well off. But when news of the events at Bree came to Tom's ears, he sent them to Mr. Butterbur, who thus got 5 good beasts at a very fair price. They had to work harder in Bree, but Bob treated them well, so on the whole they were lucky. They missed a dark and dangerous journey, but they never came to Rivendell. However, in the meanwhile, for all Mr. Butterbur knew, his money was gone for good or for bad, and he had other troubles, for there was a great commotion as soon as the remaining guests were astir and heard news of the raid on the inn. The southern travelers had lost several horses and blamed the innkeeper loudly, till it became known that one of their own number had also disappeared in the night, none other than Bill Fernie's squint-eyed companion. Suspicion fell at once on him. If you pick up with a horse thief and bring him to my house, said Butterbur angrily, you ought to pay for all the damage yourself and not come shouting at me. Go and ask Fernie where your handsome friend is. But it appeared that he was nobody's friend, and nobody could recollect when he had joined their party. After their breakfast, the hobbits had to repack and get together further supplies for the longer journey that they were now expecting. It was close on 10 o'clock before they got off. By that time the whole of Bree was buzzing with excitement. Frodo's vanishing trick, the appearance of the Black Horseman, the robbing of the stables, and not least the news that Strider the Ranger had joined the mysterious hobbits, made such a tale as would last for many uneventful years. Most of the inhabitants of Bree and Staddle, and many even from Combe and Archet, were crowded in the road to see the travelers start. The other guests in the inn were at the doors or hanging out of the windows. Strider had changed his mind, and he decided to leave Bree by the main road. Any attempt to set off cross-country at once would only make matters worse. Half the inhabitants would follow them to see what they were up to, and to prevent them from trespassing. They said farewell to Nob and Bob and took leave of Mr. Butterbur with many thanks. "I hope we shall meet again some day, when things are merry once more," said Frodo. "I should like nothing better than to stay in your house in peace for a while." They tramped off anxious and downhearted under the eyes of the crowd. Not all the faces were friendly, nor all the words that were shouted, but Strider seemed to be held in awe by most of the Breelanders, and those that he stared at shut their mouths and drew away. He walked in front with Frodo, next came Merry and Pippin, and last came Sam leading the pony, which was laden with as much of their baggage as they had the heart to give it. But already it looked less dejected, as if it approved of the change in its fortune. Sam was chewing an apple thoughtfully. He had a pocket full of them, a parting present from Nob and Bob. "Apples for walking and a pipe for sitting," he said, "but I reckon I'll miss them both before long." The hobbits took no notice of the inquisitive heads that peeped out of doors or popped over walls and fences as they passed. But as they drew near to the further gate, Frodo saw a dark, ill-kept house behind a thick hedge. The last house in the village. In one of the windows he caught a glimpse of a sallow face with sly, slanting eyes, but it vanished at once. "So that's where the southerner is hiding," he thought. "He looks more than half like a goblin." Over the hedge another man was staring boldly. He had heavy black brows and dark, scornful eyes. His large mouth curled in a sneer. He was smoking a short, black pipe. As they approached, he took it out of his mouth and spat. "Morning, Longshanks," he said. "Off early? Found some friends at last?" Strider nodded, but did not answer. "Morning, my little friends," he said to the others. "I suppose you know who you've taken up with. That's Stick-it-not Strider, that is. I've heard other names not so pretty. Watch out tonight. And you, Sammy, don't go treating my poor old pony. Pa!" he spat out. Sam turned quickly. "And you, Fernie," he said, "put your ugly face out of sight or it will get hurt." With a sudden flick, quick as lightning, an apple left his hand and hit Bill square on the nose. He ducked too late, and curses came from behind the hedge. "Waste of a good apple," said Sam regretfully, and strode on. At last they left the village behind. The escort of children and stragglers that had followed them got tired and turned back to the south gate. Passing through, they kept on along the road for some miles. Bent to the left, curving back into its eastward line as it rounded the feet of Bree Hill, and then it began to run swiftly downwards into wooded country. To their left they could see some of the houses and hobbit holes of Straddle on the gentler southeastern slopes of the hill. Down in a deep hollow away north of the road there were wisps of rising smoke that showed where Combe lay. Archet was hidden in the trees beyond. After the road had run down some way and had left Bree Hill standing tall and brown behind, they came on a narrow track that led off towards the north. "This is where we leave the open and take to cover," said Strider. "Not a shortcut, I hope," said Pippin. "Our last shortcut through woods nearly ended in disaster." "Ah, but you had not got with me. But you had not got me with you then," laughed Strider. "My cuts, short or long, don't go wrong." He took a look up and down the road. No one was in sight, and he led the way quickly down towards the wooded valley. His plan, as far as they could understand it without knowing the country, was to go towards Archet at first, but to bear right and pass it on the east, and then to steer as straight as he could over the wild lands to Weathertop Hill. In that way they would, if all went well, cut off a great loop of the road, which further on bent southwards to avoid the Midgewater marshes. But of course they would have to pass through the marshes themselves, and Strider's description of them was not encouraging. However, in the meantime, walking was not unpleasant. Indeed, if it had not been for the disturbing events of the night before, they would have enjoyed this part of the journey better than any up to that time. The sun was shining, clear but not too hot. The woods in the valley were still leafy and full of color, and seemed peaceful and wholesome. Strider guided them confidently among the many crossing paths. Although left to themselves, they would soon have been at a loss. He was taking a wandering course with many turns and doublings to put off any pursuit. "Bill Ferny will have watched where we left the road for certain," he said, "though I don't think he will follow us himself. He knows the land round here well enough, but he knows he is not a match for me in a wood. It is what he may tell others that I am afraid of. I don't suppose they are far away. If they think we have made for Archit, so much the better." Whether because of Strider's skill or for some other reason, they saw no sign and heard no sound of any other living thing all that day, neither two-footed except birds, nor four-footed except one fox and a few squirrels. The next day they began to steer a steady course eastward, and still all was quiet and peaceful. On the third day out from Bree they came out of the Chetwood. The land had been falling steadily ever since they turned aside from the road, and they now entered a flat, wide expanse of country much more difficult to manage. They were far beyond the borders of the Breeland, out in the pathless wilderness, and drawing near to the Midgewater marshes. The ground now became damp, and in places boggy, and here and there they came upon pools, and wide stretches of reeds and rushes filled with the warbling of little hidden birds. They had to pick their way carefully, to keep both dry-footed and on the proper course. At first they made fair progress, but as they went on their passage became slower and more dangerous. The marshes were bewildering and treacherous, and there was no permanent trail even for rangers to find through their shifting quagmires. The flies began to torment them, and the air was full of clouds of tiny midges that crept up their sleeves and breeches and into their hair. "I am being eaten alive," cried Pippin. "Midgewater, there are more midges than water." "What do they live on when they can't get hobbit?" asked Sam, scratching his neck. They spent a miserable day in this lonely and unpleasant country. Their camping place was damp, cold, and uncomfortable, and the biting insects would not let them sleep. There was also abominable creatures haunting the reeds and tussocks that from the sound of them were evil relatives of the cricket. There were thousands of them, and they squeaked all around, neek breek, breek neek, unceasingly all the night until the hobbits were nearly frantic. The next day, the 4th, was little better, and the night almost as comfortless. Though the neeker-breakers, as Sam called them, had been left behind, the midges still pursued them. As Frodo lay, tired but unable to close his eyes, it seemed to him that far away there came a light in the eastern sky. It flashed and faded many times. It was not the dawn, for that was still some hours off. "What is the light?" he said to Strider, who had risen and was standing gazing ahead into the night. "I do not know," Strider answered. "It is too distant to make out. It is like lightning that leaps up from the hilltops." Frodo lay down again, but for a long while he could still see the white flashes, and against them the tall dark figure of Strider, standing silent and watchful. At last he passed into an uneasy sleep. They had not gone far on the 5th day when they left the last straggling pools and reed beds of the marshes behind them. The land before them began steadily to rise again. Away in the distance eastward they could now see a line of hills. The highest of them was at the right of the line and a little separated from the others. It had a conical top, slightly flattened at the summit. "That is Weathertop," said Strider. "The old road, which we have left far away on our right, runs to the south of it and passes not far from its foot. We might reach it by noon tomorrow if we go straight towards it. I suppose we had better do so." "What do you mean?" asked Frodo. "I mean, when we do get there, it is not certain what we shall find. It is close to the road." "But surely we were hoping to find Gandalf there." "Yes, but the hope is faint. If he comes this way at all, he may not pass through Bree, so he may not know what we are doing. And anyway, unless by luck we arrive almost together, we shall miss one another. It will not be safe for him or for us to wait there long. If the riders fail to find us in the wilderness, they are likely to make for Weathertop themselves. It commands a wide view all round. Indeed, there are many birds and beasts in this country that could see us as we stand here from that hilltop. Not all the birds are to be trusted, and there are other spies more evil than they are." The hobbits looked anxiously at the distant hills. Sam looked up into the pale sky, fearing to see hawks or eagles hovering over them with bright, unfriendly eyes. "You do make me feel uncomfortable and lonesome, Strider," he said. "What do you advise us to do?" asked Frodo. "I think," answered Strider slowly, as if he were not quite sure, "I think the best thing is to go as straight eastward from here as we can, to make for the line of hills, not for Weathertop. There we can strike a path I know that runs at their feet. It will bring us to Weathertop from the north, and less openly. Then we shall see what we shall see." All that day they plodded along until the cold and early evening came down. The land became drier and more barren, but mists and vapors lay behind them on the marshes. A few melancholy birds were piping and wailing until the round red sun sank slowly into the western shadow. Then an empty silence fell. The hobbits thought of the soft light of sunset glancing through the cheerful windows of Bag End far away. At the day's end they came to a stream that wandered down from the hills to lose itself in the stagnant marshland, and they went up along its banks until up along its banks while the light lasted. It was already night when at last they halted and made their camp under some stunted alder trees by the shores of the stream. Ahead there loomed now against the dusky sky the bleak and treeless backs of the hills. That night they set a watch, and Strider, it seemed, did not sleep at all. The moon was waxing, and in the early night hours a cold gray light lay on the land. Next morning they set out again soon after sunrise. There was a frost in the air, and the sky was a pale, clear blue. The hobbits felt refreshed, as if they had had a night of unbroken sleep. Already they were getting used to much walking on short commons, shorter at any rate than what in the Shire they would have thought barely enough to keep them on their legs. Pippin declared that Frodo was looking twice the hobbit that he had been. "Very odd," said Frodo, tightening his belt, "considering that there is actually a good deal less of me. I hope the thinning process will not go on indefinitely, or I shall become a wraith." "Do not speak of such things," said Strider quickly, and with surprising earnestness. The hills drew nearer. They made an undulating ridge, often rising almost to 1,000 feet, and here and there falling again to low clefts or passes, leading into the eastern land beyond. Along the crest of the ridge, the hobbits could see what looked to be the remains of green-grown walls and dikes, and in the clefts there still stood the ruins of old works of stone. By night they had reached the feet of the westward slopes, and they were camped. It was the night of the 5th of October, and they were 6 days out from Bree. In the morning they found, for the first time since they had left the Chetwood, a track plain to see. They turned right and followed it southward. It ran cunningly, taking a line that seemed chosen so as to keep as much hidden as possible from the view, both of the hilltops above and of the flats to the west. It dived into dells and hugged steep banks, and where it passed over flatter and more open ground on either side of it, there were lines of large boulders and hewn stones that screened the travelers almost like a hedge. "I wonder who made this path and what for," said Mary, as they walked along one of these avenues where the stones were unusually large and closely set. "I am not sure that I like it. It has rather a barrow-wigtish look. Is there any barrow on Weathertop?" "No, there is no barrow on Weathertop, nor on any of these hills," answered Strider. "The men of the West did not live here, though in their later days they defended the hills for a while against the evil that came out of Angmar. This path was made to serve the forts along the walls, but long before, in the first days of the North Kingdom, they built a great watchtower on Weathertop. Amon Sul, they called it. It was burned and broken, and nothing remains of it now but a tumbled ring, like a rough crown on the old hill's head. Yet once it was tall and fair. It is told that Elendil stood there watching for the coming of Gil-galad out of the west in the days of the last alliance." The hobbits gazed at Strider. It seemed like he was learned in old lore as well as in the ways of the world. "Who was Gil-galad?" asked Mary, but Strider did not answer and seemed to be lost in thought. Suddenly a low voice murmured, "Gil-galad was an elven king, of him the harpers sadly sing, the last whose realm was fair and free between the mountains and the sea. His sword was long, his lance was keen, his shining helm afar was seen. The countless stars of heaven's field were mirrored in his silver shield. But long ago he rode away, and where he dwelleth none can say, for into darkness fell his star, in Mordor, where the shadows are." The others turned in amazement, for the voice was Sam's. "Don't stop," said Mary. "That's all I know," stammered Sam, blushing. "I learned it from Mr. Bilbo when I was a lad. He used to tell me tales like that, knowing how I was always one for hearing about elves. It was Mr. Bilbo as taught me my letters. He was mighty book-learned, was dear old Mr. Bilbo. And he wrote poetry. He wrote what I have just said." "He did not make it up," said Strider. "It is part of the lay that is called The Fall of Gil-galad, which is in an ancient tongue. Bilbo must have translated it. I never knew that." "There was a lot more," said Sam, "all about Mordor. I didn't learn that part. It gave me the shivers. I never thought I should be going that way myself." "Going to Mordor?" cried Pippin. "I hope it won't come to that." "Do not speak that name so loudly," said Strider. It was already midday when they drew near the southern end of the path and saw before them, in the pale clear light of the October sun, a gray-green bank, leading up like a bridge onto the northward slope of the hill. They decided to make for the top at once, while the daylight was broad. Concealment was no longer possible, and they could only hope that no enemy or spy was observing them. Nothing was to be seen moving on the hill. If Gandalf was anywhere about, there was no sign of him. On the western flank of Weathertop, they found a sheltered hollow, at the bottom of which there was a bowl-shaped dell with grassy sides. There they left Sam and Pippin with the pony and their packs and luggage. The other three went on. After half an hour's plodding climb, Strider reached the crown of the hill. Frodo and Merry followed, tired and breathless. The last slope had been steep and rocky. On the top they found, as Strider had said, a wide ring of ancient stonework, now crumbling or covered with age-long grass. But in the center, a cairn of broken stones had been piled. They were blackened as if with fire. About them the turf was burned to the roots, and all within the ring the grass was scorched and shriveled, as if flames had swept the hilltop, but there was no sign of any living thing. Standing upon the rim of the ruined circle, they saw all round below them a wide prospect, for the most part of lands empty and featureless, except for patches of woodland away to the south, beyond which they caught here and there the glint of distant water. Beneath them on the southern side there ran like a ribbon the old road, coming out of the west and winding up and down until it faded behind a ridge of dark land to the east. Nothing was moving on it. Following its line eastward with their eyes, they saw the mountains. The nearer foothills were brown and somber. Behind them stood taller shapes of gray, and behind those again were high white peaks glimmering among the clouds. "Well, here we are," said Mary, "and very cheerless and uninviting it looks. There is no water and no shelter and no sign of Gandalf. But I don't blame him for not waiting, if he ever came here." "I wonder," said Strider, looking round thoughtfully. "Even if he was a day or two behind us at Bree, he could have arrived here first. He can ride very swiftly when need presses." Suddenly he stooped and looked at the stone on the top of the cairn. It was flatter than the others and wider, as if it had escaped the fire. He picked it up and examined it, turning it in his fingers. "This has been handled recently," he said. "What do you think of these marks?" On the flat underside, Frodo saw some scratches. "There seems to be a stroke, a dot, and 3 more strokes," he said. "The stroke on the left might be a G rune within branches," said Strider. "It might be a sign left by Gandalf, though one cannot be sure. The scratches are fine, and they certainly look fresh, but the marks might mean something quite different, and have nothing to do with us. Rangers use runes, and they come here sometimes." "What could they mean, even if Gandalf made them?" asked Mary. "I should say," answered Strider, "that they stood for G3, and were a sign that Gandalf was here on October the 3rd. That is 3 days ago now. It would also show that he was in a hurry and danger was at hand, so that he had no time or did not dare to write anything longer or plainer. If that is so, we must be wary." "I wish we could feel sure that he made the marks, whatever they may mean," said Frodo. "It would be a great comfort to know that he was on the way, in front of us or behind us." "Perhaps," said Strider. "For myself, I believe that he was here, and was in danger. There have been scorching flames here, and now the light that we saw 3 nights ago in the eastern sky comes back to mind. I guess that he was attacked on this hilltop, but with what result I cannot tell. He is here no longer, and we must now look after ourselves and make our own way to Rivendell as best we can." "How far is Rivendell?" asked Mary, gazing round wearily. The world looked wide and wild from Weathertop. "I don't know if the round has ever been measured in miles beyond the Forsaken Inn, a day's journey east of Bree," answered Strider. "Some say it is so far, and some say otherwise. It is a strange road, and folks are glad to reach their journey's end, whether the time is long or short. But I know how long it would take me on my own feet, with fair weather and no ill fortune. 12 days from here to the ford of Bruin, where the road crosses the loud water that runs out of Rivendell. We have at least a fortnight's journey before us, for I do not think we shall be able to use the road." "A fortnight," said Frodo. "A lot may happen in that time." "It may," said Strider. They stood for a while silent on the hilltop near its southward edge. In that lonely place, Frodo for the first time fully realized his homelessness and danger. He wished bitterly that his fortune had left him in the quiet and beloved Shire. He stared down at the hateful road leading back and westward to his home. Suddenly he was aware that 2 black specks were moving slowly along it, going westward, and looking again he saw that 3 others were creeping eastward to meet it. He gave a cry and clutched Strider's arm. "Look," he said, pointing downward. At once, Strider flung himself on the ground behind the ruined circle, pulling Frodo down beside him. Merry threw himself alongside. "What is it?" he whispered. "I do not know, but I fear the worst," answered Strider. Slowly they crawled up to the edge of the ring again and peered through a cleft between two jagged stones. The light was no longer bright, for the clear morning had faded, and clouds creeping out of the east had now overtaken the sun as it began to go down. They could all see the black specks, but neither Frodo nor Merry could make out their shapes for certain. Yet something told them that there, far below, were black riders assembling on the road, beyond the foot of the hill. "Yes," said Strider, whose keener sight left him in no doubt. "The enemy is here." Hastily they crept away and slipped down the north side of the hill to find their companions. I think that is where I'm going to end it because my little eyeballs are crossing. It's really hard to see when your eyeballs do not cooperate with you. So, I'm going to try to stream again tomorrow night, and we will continue our book. Or we won't. No, it wasn't a very long stream. It was only 3.5 hours. It's long for me, but we will do another stream tomorrow, and we will read more of this very long book. I am putting my paper in it. With any luck, I will remember which side it goes to. Oh, you don't have to thank me for stream. Thank you for being here. I got to hang out with my friends for my birthday. And that is the most important part. I know what I can do. I actually do have somewhere post-it notes that stick. I know I do. Alright, I will put in a post-it note so I remember where I left off, and we will continue this hopefully tomorrow. So good night, everyone. Thank you again for hanging out with me. Thank you, Erroneous Goat, for your generosity with gifting the subs. And thank you, Albo, for the bits. It means a lot to me that y'all were here. And we will see y'all later. Have a good night or a good name. A good name. See, this is what I need. I need sleep. have a good night or a good day. Karma Incognito. I like that username. Welcome. Glad to see you here. And we will do this again. Like I said, hopefully tomorrow. Hopefully not as late, but I will get through this book by 2025. I promise. Take care, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Initiating goodnight sequence. Dispersing appropriate dosage of compound 347. Initiating phase 1 of memory calibration. This won't hurt a bit. Just close your eyes.